Hello, evening. I am your host, Mr. Night Story, and I welcome you to tonight's journey toward peaceful sleep. I provide content specifically designed to help you relax and achieve deep sleep. I understand that you use this video to assist with falling asleep, so please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel before you drift off. I would also appreciate knowing where you are watching from and at what time. Now, take a deep breath. Position your body comfortably and allow your eyes to close naturally when you feel drowsy. Relax completely as we begin tonight's journey. This happened when I was 11 years old, in the autumn of 2004. It was a Friday in late October when my parents decided I was old enough to stay home by myself. Our house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood in western Pennsylvania. Rows of similar-looking homes with modest yards separated by chain-link fences and hedgerows. Most families had lived there for years. We knew their names, their pets, which houses gave out full-sized candy bars on Halloween. My older sister Hannah, who was 15, usually stayed with me whenever our parents went out. She was my safety net, always watching out for me despite how much we bickered. But that evening, she had been invited to her best friend's house for a sleepover. My parents had tickets to see a movie with their friends, some romantic comedy I had no interest in. "We'll only be gone for 3 hours, Max," Mom said, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. "You have our cell numbers. The theater is just 15 minutes away." Dad knelt down to my level, his hands on my shoulders. "You're going to be fine, champ. The doors are locked, and Mrs. Peterson next door knows you're here alone. Call her if anything happens." I nodded, putting on a brave face even as anxiety churned inside me. I had always been the nervous type, afraid of the dark basement with its strange noises, afraid of answering the phone, afraid of strangers. But I also wanted my parents to see me as mature. "I know, Dad. I'll be okay," I said, forcing confidence into my voice. As they walked out the door, Mom turned back. "Remember, don't answer the door for anyone. We have our keys." Then they were gone, and for the first time in my life, I was truly alone. For the first 30 minutes, I felt an unexpected thrill of independence. Our family home seemed different somehow, both familiar and strange when experienced in solitude. I walked from room to room, touching furniture, opening cabinets, doing all the little things I normally wouldn't do with others watching. The kitchen clock read 7:15 p.m. Outside, darkness had already fallen, the October night arriving earlier each day. I made sure all the blinds were closed, pulling them tight against the windows. Then I methodically checked each door, the front door, back door, and side door leading to the garage, making sure they were locked. I even tested them, turning the knobs and pushing against the wood just to be certain. I made myself a bowl of ice cream, more than I was usually allowed, and settled onto the living room couch with the remote control. This was freedom. No sister to fight with over what to watch, no parents to tell me it was time for homework or bed. Just me, the TV, and the comfortable silence of an empty house. I flipped through channels, finally settling on a reality show I wasn't normally permitted to watch. The contestants were arguing loudly over something trivial, their faces contorted with exaggerated anger. The volume was low, just enough for me to hear because I wanted to be able to detect any unusual sounds in the house. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees that lined our street. Branches scraped gently against the siding, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times before but now seemed ominous. I told myself there was nothing to fear. Everything was normal. I was safe. That's when the first knock came. Knock. 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 3 sharp raps against our front door sliced through the quiet house. The sound was deliberate, confident. Someone who expected an answer. My body tensed immediately. The remote control slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. My heartbeat accelerated until I could feel it hammering against my ribs. Who would be visiting at 8:17 p.m.? My parents had keys. My sister was at her friend's house. We weren't expecting packages or deliveries. I sat frozen, barely breathing, hoping whoever it was would assume no one was home and leave. 10 seconds passed in silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. Louder this time, more insistent. I pulled my knees to my chest, making myself as small as possible on the couch. Dad's words echoed in my mind. Don't answer the door for anyone. I had no intention of disobeying. The knocking continued, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. My palms grew damp with sweat. Knock, knock, knock. Each impact against the door seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. I imagined a stranger standing there, peering through the narrow windows that flanked our front door, trying to detect movement inside. Could they see the blue glow of the television reflecting off the walls? Could they hear my breathing? After what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse. Now I couldn't track where the person was or what they were doing. Were they leaving, or merely changing tactics? I remained motionless, listening intently for footsteps on our porch, the sound of a car starting, anything that might indicate the visitor had departed. Minutes passed. My muscles ached from tension. Finally, curiosity overwhelmed fear. I needed to know if they were gone. Carefully, I slid off the couch, my sock-covered feet making no sound on the floor. I approached the front window, staying to the side where I wouldn't be easily visible from outside. With trembling fingers, I parted the blinds just enough to peer through. Our front porch was empty, the driveway too. The street beyond lay quiet and still, illuminated by the yellowish glow of street lamps. No cars were parked nearby that I didn't recognize. Whoever had been knocking was gone, or at least not visible from this vantage point. Relief washed over me. Probably just someone with the wrong address, I reasoned. Or maybe a neighbor needing to borrow something who had given up when no one answered. I returned to the couch, though my show no longer held any interest. I changed channels repeatedly, settling finally on a documentary about deep-sea creatures. The narrator's calm, authoritative voice had a soothing effect. My heartbeat gradually slowed to normal. By 8:45 p.m., I had almost forgotten about the incident. My parents would be home in about an hour. The house felt comfortable again, a sanctuary rather than a trap. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, humming softly to myself. That's when I heard it. A soft, irregular tapping coming from the rear of the house. At first, I thought it might be a tree branch or perhaps the beginning of rain. But the sound had a deliberate quality to it. Tap, 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 tap. It seemed to be coming from the kitchen window that overlooked our backyard. The window was covered by thin curtains that allowed some light through but obscured details from either side. I stood motionless in the center of the kitchen, water glass clutched in my hand, listening. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't random. It wasn't the wind. Someone was out there, touching our window. The distance from where I stood to the kitchen window was perhaps 10 feet, a journey that suddenly seemed impossible to make. The tapping continued, patient and methodical. I knew I should run, hide, call for help. But a perverse curiosity rooted me to the spot. I needed to see. Setting my glass down with exaggerated care, I moved toward the window. The linoleum floor felt cold beneath my feet. With each step, the tapping grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a finger against the glass. It was something harder. Metal, perhaps. A ring, or a tool. When I reached the window, I hesitated. The curtains glowed faintly from the kitchen light behind me, creating a perfect silhouette of my body for anyone outside to see. I reached for the light switch and flipped it off, plunging the kitchen into darkness. Now I could see vague shapes through the curtain, the outline of our back porch, the darker mass of shrubbery beyond. The tapping had stopped when the light went out. For several heartbeats, nothing moved. Then, slowly, I pulled the curtain aside. A face stared back at me through the glass, not 2 feet away. It was a man, middle-aged, with several days' growth of beard and eyes that seemed to reflect no light. His skin appeared waxy in the dim illumination from the neighbor's security light. He didn't move when I revealed myself. He simply stared, his expression neither threatening nor friendly, but somehow worse, calculating. When our eyes met, his lips curled into a slight smile. He raised one hand, revealing a small metal object, a screwdriver or awl, that he'd been using to tap the glass. The paralysis that had gripped me shattered. I stumbled backward, dropping the curtain. A small whimper escaped my throat as I turned and ran from the kitchen down the hallway toward my bedroom at the far end of the house. Behind me, the tapping resumed, louder now, more urgent. I slammed my bedroom door and locked it, then dragged my desk chair under the doorknob the way I'd seen in movies. My hands shook so badly I could barely manage it. I dove onto my bed, burrowing beneath the covers, and pulled a pillow over my head. The house had fallen silent again. No tapping, no footsteps, no breaking glass. The absence of sound was somehow more terrifying than noise would have been. I couldn't tell what was happening. Was he breaking in? Was he circling the house, testing other windows and doors? Or had he left, satisfied with the fear he'd instilled in me? Under the covers, I fumbled for the phone I'd stashed in my pocket. My fingers were numb, uncooperative. The screen blurred through my tears as I tried to dial my parents. No answer. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. They were still in the movie. I considered calling 911, but a terrible doubt stopped me. What if the police came and found nothing? What if I had imagined the face, exaggerated the danger? What if they called my parents out of the movie for nothing? The humiliation would be unbearable. So I waited, ears straining for any sound beyond my thundering heartbeat. Every creak of the house settling, every whisper of the heating system turning on, sent fresh waves of terror through me. Time stretched and distorted. Minutes felt like hours. I prayed silently, desperately. God, please keep me safe. Please make him go away. Please bring Mom and Dad home now. At some point, exhaustion began to compete with fear. My eyelids grew heavy despite my determination to stay alert. I jerked awake repeatedly, each time certain that something had changed, that someone was in the room with me, watching from a dark corner. The digital clock on my nightstand showed 9:53 p.m. when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of something sliding against the outside wall of the house directly beneath my bedroom window. The noise was subtle, a soft scraping like fabric against siding. Then a slight metallic sound, perhaps a belt buckle or tool touching the aluminum window frame. My window was locked, I reminded myself. All windows were locked. I had checked them personally earlier. But what if one wasn't? What if I had forgotten one, or what if the lock was faulty? I couldn't stay under the covers anymore. I needed to see, to know. With monumental effort, I emerged from my blanket cocoon and crept to the edge of my bed. My window was covered by heavy curtains that I had drawn closed earlier. Like before, I would need to approach and look out to see what was happening. Each step across my bedroom floor seemed to announce my presence. The old hardwood creaked slightly underfoot. I pressed myself against the wall beside the window, breathing as quietly as possible. With one quick motion, I tugged the curtain aside and looked out. Nothing. The backyard was empty, illuminated dimly by moonlight and the neighbor's distant porch light. No movement, no shadowy figure. Nothing but the familiar landscape of our yard. The swing set I had outgrown but my parents hadn't removed. The shed where Dad kept the lawnmower. The row of evergreens marking the property line. As I stared out, trying to process this unexpected normalcy, headlights swept across the scene. A car was pulling into our driveway. My parents were home. Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees nearly buckled. I ran from my room, forgetting about the chair barricade until it clattered to the floor. I raced through the house, flipping on lights as I went, and reached the front door just as I heard a key in the lock. They found me there, wild-eyed and trembling, tears streaming down my face. "Someone was here," I blurted before they could speak. "Someone was at the window." He was looking at me. My father immediately went into protection mode. He told Mom to stay with me while he checked around the house. I clung to my mother, unable to stop shaking as Dad moved methodically from room to room, then went outside with a flashlight to examine the perimeter. When he returned 20 minutes later, his expression was grim. "There are footprints in the soil beneath several windows," he confirmed. "And this was on the back porch." He held up a small metal object, a thin pointed awl with a wooden handle. The tool the man had been using to tap on our window. Mom called the police while Dad continued to check the house. Officers arrived 12 minutes later, taking our statements and examining the evidence. They found partial fingerprints on the window glass and took the awl as evidence. They also discovered something that sent a fresh wave of horror through me. Scratch marks around the lock on our back door, evidence of an attempted entry. "You did everything right," one officer told me, his face kind but serious. "You didn't open the door, you hid, you stayed quiet. That probably saved your life." In the days that followed, we learned that 3 houses in nearby neighborhoods had been broken into over the previous month. In one home, the family had been asleep upstairs while thieves emptied their valuables from the first floor. In another, more disturbingly, a teenage girl had been home alone, much like me, but had answered the door. She had been bound and terrorized while intruders ransacked her house. My parents installed a security system the following week. For months afterward, I couldn't sleep alone. I either stayed in my sister's room or had her stay in mine. The face at the window haunted my dreams. Sometimes I would wake gasping, certain I had heard tapping at the glass. The police never caught the man, never even identified a suspect. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, moving from house to house, peering through windows, tapping on glass, searching for the vulnerabilities that all homes and all people inevitably possess. 17 years have passed since that night. I'm an adult now, with my own home and my own security concerns. I check my locks obsessively. I never leave my curtains open after dark. I installed the most advanced security system available, but still sometimes when I'm alone at night and the house settles around me, I hear it. That soft, deliberate tapping. And I know deep down that no lock, no alarm, no precaution can fully protect us from the darkness that waits just outside our windows, watching patiently for an opportunity to get in. June 17th, 2024. I was 34 years old when everything changed. Looking back, I realize how fragile security can be, how the walls we build around ourselves are merely an illusion. I had been living in the Oakwood apartments for just over 2 years. My unit was on the second floor of a 4-story building that stretched like a concrete backbone along Harrison Street, about 10 minutes from downtown. The hallways were long and straight, with identical doors spaced at regular intervals, numbers in ascending order that I'd walk past every day without a second thought. My apartment was nothing special. 1 bedroom, a modest living room that opened to a small kitchen, and a bathroom with a shower that sometimes worked properly. The rent was reasonable, the neighbors mostly quiet. I liked my corner unit because it had a small balcony overlooking the parking lot and a strip of decorative bushes below. I worked as an IT specialist at Meridian Financial, which meant long hours troubleshooting network problems and helping executives who couldn't figure out how to reset their passwords. The monotony was broken only by my evening routines, takeout dinners, streaming shows I barely paid attention to, occasional calls with my mother who lived 3 states away. That ordinary existence shattered on a Tuesday night in June. Had I known what waited for me, I would never have returned home that evening. I would have kept driving, past the familiar turnoff, past the city limits, into some nameless town where I could disappear. But I didn't know. How could I? That day had been particularly exhausting. I had spent hours rebuilding a server after a critical failure, skipping lunch to meet the deadline. By the time I arrived home at 9:15 p.m., my shoulders ached and hunger gnawed at my insides. I unlocked my door, tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter, and ordered pizza from an app on my phone. I remember exactly what I was watching. Some mindless cooking competition where contestants scrambled to create gourmet dishes from bizarre ingredients. The pizza arrived around 9:45 and I ate directly from the box, barely tasting the food as my attention drifted between the television and my phone. The first anomaly occurred at approximately 10:20 p.m. A soft thump from somewhere inside my apartment, like something being set down or bumping against a wall. I paused the show and listened. The building had its usual ambient sounds, the hum of the air conditioning, distant footsteps above me, the occasional closing door, but this had been different, closer, contained within my own space. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. Of course, no one would answer. I convinced myself it was nothing. Perhaps a neighbor had dropped something heavy, or the building was settling. I turned the volume up slightly and continued watching, though my attention had fractured. Something felt wrong. Over the next half hour, I caught myself repeatedly glancing toward the darkened bedroom doorway. Why hadn't I turned that light on when I came home? I never left it dark. Or had I? The day had been long, my routine disrupted by exhaustion. Perhaps I simply forgot. What I couldn't explain was the growing sense of intrusion, the unmistakable feeling that the apartment's atmosphere had changed, as though the air pressure had subtly shifted since I'd been gone. At 10:53 p.m., I know the time precisely because I checked my phone seconds before. Something seized my attention with primal urgency. My skin tightened, the hair on my arms standing up as an instinct older than rational thought commanded me to look behind me. I turned toward my bedroom doorway, 5 feet from where I sat. There was a man there. Not fully in the doorway, but partially hidden behind the frame, only his head and one shoulder visible as he peered around the corner. He was watching me. Had been watching me for God knows how long. His face remains burned into my memory, pale, gaunt, with deep-set eyes that reflected the television's glow. Dark hair, cropped short, stubble along his jaw. A completely ordinary face that became terrifying in its wrongness, its presence where no face should be. Our eyes locked for what felt like minutes but could only have been a fraction of a second. Then he pulled back, disappearing into the darkness of my bedroom. I didn't scream, didn't call out. My body responded before my mind could process what was happening. I launched myself off the couch, my phone tumbling between the cushions, and charged toward the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, every second stretching into agonizing eternity as I imagined him emerging from the bedroom behind me. The door swung open. I burst into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind me, and only then did the frozen breath in my lungs expel in a desperate gasp. I stood in the hallway, back pressed against my door, heart hammering against my ribs with such force I thought they might crack. My mind raced through fragmented thoughts. Who was he? How did he get in? Was he still inside? The hallway stretched in both directions, identical doors, mocking fluorescent lights. My phone was inside. My keys were inside. I was effectively trapped. Panicked logic told me to run, to put as much distance between myself and the stranger as possible. But run where? Without keys or phone, I had no transportation, no way to call for help. The isolation was suffocating. Dozens of people surrounding me in neighboring apartments, yet completely unreachable behind their locked doors. I remembered Courtney in 217, 4 doors down. We weren't close friends, but we chatted at the mailboxes sometimes, exchanged pleasantries in the laundry room. Once, we'd signed for each other's packages. It was tenuous, but it was something. I moved down the hall, each step on the thin carpet seeming to echo impossibly loud. Reaching her door, I knocked, softly at first, then with increasing urgency. No response. I knocked again, harder, my knuckles beginning to ache. "Courtney, it's me from 213. Please, I need help." The silence stretched. A wall clock somewhere ticked away seconds that felt like hours. No footsteps approached her door. No lights flicked on from within. I was truly alone. Standing in that empty hallway, I made what was perhaps the most foolish decision of my life. I decided to go back in. The logic, if you could call it that, was simple. I needed my phone to call police. I needed my keys to escape. Without them, I remained vulnerable, stranded in a building with someone who had invaded my home. I formulated a plan. Opened the door quickly, dashed to the couch for my phone, grabbed the keys from the counter on my way out. 10 seconds. Maximum. If the intruder was still in the bedroom, I'd be gone before he could react. If he'd fled, all the better. I approached my door slowly, listening for any sound from within. Nothing. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I took 3 deep breaths, steeling myself. On the third exhale, I twisted the knob and pushed the door open in one fluid motion. He was standing in the center of my living room. Not hiding anymore. Not lurking in shadows. Standing perfectly still, facing the door, as if he'd been waiting for me to return. In the full light, I could see details I wished I hadn't. The stained gray t-shirt, work pants with dark smudges on the knees, hands hanging at his sides, one holding something metallic that glinted under the ceiling light. For a suspended moment, we stared at each other, mutual shock rendering us both immobile. Then his lips parted, beginning to form words I never heard. I slammed the door with such force the frame shuddered. Without thinking, without breathing, I ran. My body moved with animalistic precision. I sprinted down the hallway toward the stairwell, shoulder hitting the crash bar on the fire door with enough force to bruise. The stairs blurred beneath me as I descended, gripping the railing to keep from falling as I took them 2, 3 at a time. Was he following? I didn't dare look back. Every horror movie warning screamed through my mind. Don't look back, don't trip, don't slow down. The first floor hallway stretched before me, empty and endless. I passed the mailboxes, the community bulletin board, finally reaching the main entrance. I burst through the doors into the night air, gulping it desperately, the sudden shift from recycled building air to the outside world momentarily disorienting. The parking lot spread before me, my car sitting uselessly without its keys. The street beyond offered my only option. I stuck to the shadows as I moved, hugging the building's perimeter until I reached the sidewalk. Every sound, distant traffic, rustling leaves, my own ragged breathing, set my nerves firing. I walked rapidly, not quite running, putting distance between myself and the apartment building with each step. The gas station's fluorescent glow appeared in the distance like salvation. Open 24 hours, its harsh lighting spilled onto the surrounding pavement, dispelling shadows where threats might hide. As I approached, I could see a lone attendant behind the counter, scrolling on his phone, completely unaware that he represented my only lifeline to safety. I pushed open the door, the electronic chime announcing my arrival. The attendant looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to concern as he registered my appearance. Disheveled, barefoot. I hadn't even realized I'd left without shoes, eyes wild with terror. "Please," I managed, my voice barely recognizable. "Call the police. Someone's in my apartment." The police response was efficient, but ultimately futile. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, officers taking my statement there in the gas station before escorting me back to the apartment building. They drew weapons before entering my unit, communicating in terse professional language that somehow made the situation even more surreal. He was gone. The bedroom window to the balcony stood open, the screen removed and leaning against the wall. Cool night air circulated through the apartment, carrying away any lingering scent of the intruder. The officers documented everything meticulously. My laptop was missing from the desk. My wallet had been taken from the kitchen counter where I always left it. A small jewelry box containing my grandfather's watch and mother's earrings had been emptied. Oddly, other valuables remained: my television, gaming system, expensive headphones. My phone was discovered wedged between the couch cushions, overlooked in his hasty exit. Small mercy. They dusted for fingerprints, took photographs, asked detailed questions about entry points and building security. They seemed particularly interested in the balcony door, which I admitted I rarely locked, assuming the second-floor height made it inaccessible. One officer pointed out the nearby drainage pipe that ran from roof to ground, an easy climbing aid for someone determined to enter. "Probably watching the building for a while," the older officer said. "Looking for patterns, vulnerabilities. These guys are opportunists." The implication hung in the air. I had been watched, studied, my routines mapped by predatory eyes I never noticed. They took my statement, provided a case number, promised to investigate. We all knew the likelihood of recovering my possessions was minimal. That was 4 months ago. I moved out the following week, breaking my lease and absorbing the financial penalty without complaint. No amount of money was worth staying in a space where every shadow contained potential threat, where the bedroom doorway became a portal of terror. My new apartment is on the 4th floor of a building with controlled access entry, security cameras in the hallways and window locks I check obsessively each night. I sleep with a baseball bat beside my bed and a doorstop wedged under my bedroom door, small talismans against the lingering fear. The police never found him. The case remains open, but inactive. One of thousands of home invasions that occur each year, remarkable only to those who experience them. Sometimes I wake suddenly in the night, certain I've heard movement in the next room. The fear grips me completely in those moments, rational thought dissolving as I lie paralyzed, listening for breathing not my own, for footsteps approaching in the dark. I've had the locks changed twice. I position my furniture to minimize hiding places. I check closets when I return home. These precautions have become ritual, necessary for survival. What haunts me most isn't the material loss or even the violation of my space. It's the realization that the boundaries between safety and danger are paper thin. The stranger who stood in my living room took more than my possessions. He took my certainty that closing a door could separate me from harm. I still don't know why he chose my apartment that night. Was it truly random opportunity? Or had he been watching me for days, weeks perhaps, learning when I left, when I returned, studying the rhythms of my solitary life? I pray to God I'll never know the answer, but I check the locks again, just to be sure. It was the summer of 2019, when I was 22 and had just completed my junior year at the University of Michigan. The familiar drive home felt longer than usual, perhaps because of the weight of exhaustion after finals week. My old Honda Civic was packed to the brim with boxes, clothes, and the scattered remnants of another academic year. My parents' house appeared exactly as I had left it months before, a 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, nestled on a quiet street lined with maple trees. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed both my parents' cars were gone. They had mentioned something about dinner with friends, but in my state of fatigue, the details had blurred. The house was unnaturally quiet as I unlocked the front door. No television hum, no clattering dishes, no father calling out sports statistics from his recliner. Just the low mechanical whir of the refrigerator and the occasional settling creak of the house. "Hello?" I called out, more out of habit than necessity. My voice echoed slightly against the hardwood floors. I dropped my bags in the foyer and checked my phone. A text from Mom confirmed they wouldn't be back until around 10 p.m. It was only 6:30. I had hours alone in this empty house. The basement had always been my domain. During high school, I had claimed it as my personal apartment. Bedroom, bathroom, and a common area with a large television. My parents rarely ventured down there, respecting my space in a way that made me feel both independent and supported. I carried several boxes downstairs, flicking on lights as I went. The basement air felt stale, undisturbed. I set my belongings down in the common area and collapsed onto the worn leather couch, allowing myself a moment of respite before the unpacking began. The silence of the house pressed against my ears. Something felt different, off. I dismissed the thought as travel fatigue and began organizing my things. After unpacking 2 boxes of clothes and arranging them in the built-in shelves of the common area, I settled in front of the television. A baseball game provided background noise as I scrolled through my phone, catching up on messages from friends who had already made it home for the summer. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffling sound coming from my bedroom. The door was closed, exactly as I had found it upon arrival. I hadn't been in there yet. I lowered the volume on the television and listened. Nothing. Perhaps it was just the house settling or the ventilation system kicking on. Old houses make strange noises. This was something my father reminded me of frequently when I was young and convinced that monsters lived in the walls. I returned to my phone, but the sound came again. Distinct this time. Like fabric brushing against fabric. Probably just a mouse, I muttered to myself, setting my phone down. Or the cat got stuck down here before they left. I stood up and approached my bedroom door, not particularly concerned. Our family cat, Oscar, had a habit of finding his way into closed rooms and then complaining loudly until someone freed him. With casual confidence, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The bedroom was dark. I reached for the light switch, but before my fingers found it, I heard the unmistakable sound of the closet door closing. A soft click followed by the slight creaking of hinges. I froze, my hand still outstretched toward the light switch. That wasn't Oscar. That wasn't the house settling. That was a deliberate movement. The light flickered on beneath my trembling fingers, illuminating my childhood bedroom. Everything appeared normal. Bed made with the navy comforter my mother had purchased before I left for college. Desk organized and dusted. Bookshelves lined with high school trophies and dog-eared paperbacks. The closet door was firmly shut. I stared at it, suddenly aware of my shallow breathing and the rapid beating of my heart against my ribs. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. Air pressure from opening the bedroom door had caused the closet door to close. The hinges were loose. I had imagined it, but I knew what I had heard. The closet was a walk-in, large enough to hide a person. The thought sent goosebumps racing across my skin. I backed away slowly, unwilling to investigate further. The baseball game continued in the background, the announcer's voice suddenly shrill and jarring. Without a second thought, I turned and walked briskly out of the bedroom, pulling the door shut behind me. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, irrationally afraid that if I moved too slowly, something might grab my ankles from behind. The cool air of the main floor washed over me as I emerged from the basement stairwell, but it did little to dispel my unease. I paced the living room, debating whether to call my parents. What would I say? That I was afraid of my own closet? That I thought someone might be hiding in our house? They would worry unnecessarily, cut their evening short. I was an adult now. I could handle this myself. Instead, I turned on every light in the living room and kitchen. The house seemed less threatening with the shadows banished. I found the remote and switched on the television, selecting a cooking competition show, something bright and cheerful to distract me from my racing thoughts. I positioned myself on the sofa with a clear view of the basement door. 30 minutes passed without incident. The show's host announced the winner of the challenge, and contestants cheered. My heartbeat had slowed to a normal pace, and I had nearly convinced myself that my imagination had gotten the better of me. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, deliberate steps, ascending toward the main floor. I muted the television, listening intently. The steps continued, unhurried and confident. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was in the house. My phone lay on the coffee table. I reached for it, fingers trembling slightly, ready to dial 911. But some morbid curiosity kept me watching the door, waiting to see who or what would emerge. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door swung open. A man stepped into the living room. He appeared to be in his late 20s or early 30s, with an unkempt beard and long, dark hair that hung in greasy strands around his face. His clothes were dirty and torn in places, and his eyes were vacant, unfocused, as if he were looking through me rather than at me. I stood immediately, putting the coffee table between us. "Who are you?" I demanded, attempting to sound authoritative despite the fear constricting my throat. "How did you get in here?" The man said nothing. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with those empty eyes, and took another step forward. "Stop right there," I warned, grasping my phone. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave right now." He continued his approach, movements jerky and unpredictable. His lips moved slightly, as if he were whispering to himself, but no sound reached my ears. I backed away, maintaining distance between us. "I said stop! This is private property. You're trespassing." The intruder showed no sign of comprehension. His vacant stare remained fixed on me as he advanced, backing me toward the far wall of the living room. The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. This man was not in his right mind. Whether drugs or mental illness, something had broken his connection to reality. Reasoning with him was futile. I continued retreating until my back pressed against the wall. The man was now only feet away, his breathing audible, ragged and uneven. A sour smell emanated from him, the stench of unwashed body and something chemical I couldn't identify. With my back against the wall and nowhere left to retreat, I watched in horror as the man's vacant expression transformed. His eyes focused suddenly, narrowing as his lips pulled back in a grimace. Without warning, he lunged forward, arms outstretched toward me. Instinct took over. I dove to the side, feeling his fingers graze my leg as I tumbled to the floor. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, but adrenaline propelled me forward. I scrambled to my feet, noticing that the intruder had also fallen, his body crashing into the wall where I had stood moments before. He recovered more slowly than I did, giving me precious seconds to sprint toward the basement door. My mind raced through limited options. The front door was too far, requiring me to circle back around the intruder. The kitchen led to a dead end. The basement had another exit, the sliding glass door that opened to the backyard. I raced down the stairs, hearing the man's heavy footfalls behind me. The basement that had been my sanctuary for years now felt like a trap. I skidded across the carpeted floor, heading for the sliding door at the far end of the common area. My fingers fumbled with the lock, panic making my movements clumsy. Behind me, the intruder descended the last few steps. The lock finally gave way with a click, and I yanked the door open, cool evening air rushing in. I burst into the backyard and ran toward the side gate, not daring to look back. The sound of the sliding door slamming against its frame told me the man had followed. I pushed through the gate and emerged onto the street, the asphalt rough beneath my feet. "Help!" I screamed, running down the middle of the road. "Somebody help me! Call the police!" The neighborhood was quiet, most families inside for dinner. Windows glowed warm and inviting from houses that suddenly seemed miles away. I glanced over my shoulder. The intruder had followed me through the gate but was now standing still, watching me from the edge of our property. His head swiveled slowly, taking in the surroundings as if confused by the open space. I continued running, putting as much distance between us as possible. After about 50 yards, I risked another look back. The man had wandered onto the neighbor's lawn, movements aimless now. He disappeared behind the Peterson's hedge out of my sight. My lungs burned as I slowed to a stop, bending over to catch my breath. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "There's an intruder," I gasped between breaths. "In my neighborhood. He was in my house. I don't know how he got in." I provided my address and a description of the man, answering the dispatcher's questions as clearly as my racing heart would allow. She assured me officers were on their way and instructed me to stay in a safe location. I stood at the end of our street, watching from a distance as police cruisers arrived, blue and red lights painting the quiet neighborhood in alternating colors. 2 officers approached me while others began searching the area. "He went that way," I said, pointing toward the Petersons' yard. "Behind the hedge. He seemed disoriented." One officer stayed with me while his partner joined the search. I recounted the story, coming home to an empty house, hearing noises from my closet, the man emerging from the basement. The officer nodded, taking notes in a small pad. "Do you have any idea how he might have gotten in?" he asked. I shook my head. The doors were locked when I arrived. My parents are out for the evening. "We'll need to check the house for points of entry," he said, "once we've secured the area." Time stretched as we waited. Neighbors emerged from their homes curious about the commotion. Mrs. Gannon from across the street brought me a blanket and a glass of water, though the summer evening was warm. I hadn't realized I was shaking until I tried to hold the glass. "There's been some break-ins in Westview," I overheard one officer saying to another, referring to a neighborhood about a mile away. "Could be related." After what seemed like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, a burst of radio static broke the silence. "We've got him," a voice crackled. "Back of 1847 Maple, hiding in a garden shed." Relief washed over me, my knees nearly buckling. The officer beside me steadied me with a hand on my shoulder. "They found him," he assured me. "You're safe now." My parents arrived home to find their driveway filled with police cars and their son wrapped in a neighbor's blanket. Their faces drained of color when they saw me, fear replacing the confusion in their eyes. "Alex, what happened? Are you hurt?" My mother's voice was tight with panic as she rushed toward me. "I'm okay," I assured her, accepting her fierce hug. There was someone in the house. My father's expression hardened as he spoke with the officers. I watched his jaw clench, hands balling into fists at his sides. The intruder, now in custody, sat in the back of a police cruiser. In the harsh interior light, he looked smaller somehow, less threatening. His head lolled against the window, eyes unfocused once more. Detective Morales arrived shortly after my parents, introducing himself with a firm handshake. He was middle-aged with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. "We'd like to take your statement at the station," he said. "But first we need to check your house for evidence of how he gained entry." We followed him inside, the familiar space now feeling violated. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed or stolen. My laptop still sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. My mother's jewelry box remained untouched on her dresser. It wasn't until we reached the basement that we found our answer. The small window in the storage room, normally secured with a simple latch, had been forced open. Glass shards littered the concrete floor beneath it. "Your parents said they left around 5 o'clock?" Detective Morales asked, examining the window frame. My father nodded. "For dinner with friends. We locked everything up before we left." Based on the evidence and timeline, he probably broke in shortly after they departed, Morales explained. "Before you arrived home." The realization that the intruder had been hiding in my house when I arrived sent a wave of nausea through me. He had been there all along, listening as I moved through the rooms, watching as I unpacked my belongings, waiting in my closet. "We've identified him as Michael Denton," Morales continued. "He has a history of break-ins, usually targeting empty homes, suffers from severe schizophrenia, and has been off his medication for months, according to his family." "But why our house?" my mother asked, voice trembling slightly. Morales shook his head. "Probably random. These aren't usually planned crimes. He seeks shelter, sometimes food. Your house likely looked unoccupied when your son arrived and surprised him." I thought about the man's vacant stare, his disconnection from reality. There had been no malice in his eyes, only confusion and fear. The understanding did little to ease my own fear. After giving my statement at the police station, we returned home well after midnight. My parents moved through the house methodically, checking and rechecking locks, closing blinds, setting the alarm system that had been installed years ago but rarely used. "You're staying in the guest room tonight," my mother insisted. "I don't want you in the basement." I didn't argue. The thought of sleeping in my bedroom, knowing the intruder had been hiding in my closet, made my skin crawl. Despite my exhaustion, sleep remained elusive. I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, replaying the events of the evening. Each creak of the house, each whisper of wind against the windows, sent my heart racing anew. When I finally drifted off near dawn, my dreams were filled with chases through endless hallways, closet doors opening to reveal empty eyes and reaching hands. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disoriented. The events of the previous day crashed back into my consciousness with stomach-turning clarity. My father had already left for work, but my mother hovered anxiously, offering breakfast I couldn't eat and reassurances that felt hollow. "Detective Morales called," she said, setting a cup of coffee before me. "They're holding Michael Denton for psychiatric evaluation. He won't be released anytime soon." I nodded, staring into the dark liquid. "Did they say anything else about him? Why he was here?" She hesitated. "They found a backpack in the woods behind Westview. Looks like he'd been living rough for a while. Detective Morales thinks he was just looking for somewhere warm and dry." The image of the man's vacant expression flashed in my mind. I wondered what voices he heard, what demons pursued him through his fractured reality. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," I admitted quietly. "If I hadn't noticed him, or if I'd confronted him in the closet." My mother reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "But you didn't. You're safe. That's all that matters." But safety felt like an illusion now, fragile and easily shattered. In the days that followed, we reinforced our home's security. New deadbolts on all doors, motion sensor lights installed around the perimeter, the basement windows replaced with unbreakable glass. My father spent hours researching home security systems, eventually selecting one with door sensors, glass break detectors, and cameras that could be monitored from our phones. "No one's getting in here again," he declared as he tested the system for the third time. "I promise you that." I nodded, grateful for his efforts. but aware that no amount of locks or alarms could fully restore the sense of security I had lost. My mother suggested I might want to talk to someone, a therapist or counselor, about the experience. "Trauma doesn't just disappear," she said gently. "It helps to process it with someone who understands." I agreed to consider it, though the thought of reliving the experience with a stranger held little appeal. A week after the incident, I finally ventured back into my basement bedroom. My mother had washed all the linens, vacuumed the carpet, and even rearranged some of the furniture, trying to make the space feel new, untainted. I stood in the doorway, surveying the room that had once been my sanctuary. The closet door was open, interior lights on, revealing empty space and hanging clothes. No monsters, no intruders. Just fabric and wood and shadows. With deliberate steps, I crossed to the closet and examined every corner, running my fingers along the walls as if to convince myself of their solidity, their normalcy. That night I slept in my own bed for the first time since returning home. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by every sound from the house above and around me, but it came. In the morning, I awoke to sunlight filtering through my basement windows and the distant sound of my mother making breakfast upstairs. The fear remained, a shadow at the edges of my consciousness, but it no longer consumed me. I thought about Michael Denton, wondered where he was now, what treatment he was receiving. I hoped, for his sake and others, that he would find his way back to reality, back to safety. As I climbed the stairs to join my parents for breakfast, I realized that my home would never feel exactly as it had before. The intrusion had left an invisible mark, an awareness of vulnerability that would linger long after the locks were changed and the alarms installed. But I also understood that fear, like grief, transforms over time. It doesn't disappear. It integrates into our existence, becoming part of the lens through which we view the world. Not necessarily sharper or dimmer, just altered. And in that alteration, there is growth. A deeper appreciation for safety when it exists. A greater resilience when it is threatened. Outside, the summer sun illuminated the familiar street, neighbors moving through their morning routines, unaware of the darkness that had briefly touched our home. Life continued its steady rhythm, indifferent to our individual traumas and triumphs. I said a silent prayer of thanks to God for my safety, for the instincts that had guided me away from danger, for the future that still stretched before me, altered but unbroken.
I lived in rural Florida about 10 years ago when I was 17. Our house sat on roughly 1.6 acres of property, bordered by dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly behind our home. Back then, we lived on a narrow gravel road with just one streetlight positioned halfway up from our house. The isolation was both peaceful and unsettling, especially after sunset. Our neighborhood, if you could call it that, consisted of only 6 scattered houses. From our property, we could only see our immediate neighbors. About 500 feet up the road stood a small cabin where family friends lived as renters. The location perfectly captures that distinctly southern rural isolation, close enough to civilization to not feel completely cut off, but remote enough that help wasn't just a quick minute away. Growing up, I had always been fascinated by the paranormal. While other teenagers obsessed over sports or music, I spent countless hours researching unexplained phenomena and reading accounts of strange encounters. My mother's spiritual practices only intensified my curiosity. She practiced paganism and various forms of protective rituals. The good kind, she would always clarify whenever anyone asked. Her beliefs were rooted in protection and harmony with nature, though I never fully understood the extent of her practices until later. Our property had an unusual energy about it. The towering pines that surrounded our clearing seemed to hold secrets in their shadows, and the forest floor, carpeted with fallen needles and dried leaves, muffled sounds in a way that made the woods feel unnaturally quiet at times. During the day, These woods were my playground. By night, they transformed into something else entirely. That particular evening began like many others. It was early autumn, and the Florida heat had finally started to subside, giving way to pleasantly cool evenings. My parents, two older siblings, and several relatives had gathered at the cabin up the road for one of their regular get-togethers. The sounds of laughter and music drifted down to our house, muted by distance and the absorption of the surrounding trees. I stayed behind with my younger sister, who had fallen asleep on the couch while watching a movie. The living room was bathed in the flickering blue light of the television, casting strange, elongated shadows across the walls. The clock on the wall read just after 7 p.m., and darkness had fully descended outside our windows. While my sister slept, I felt restless. The house seemed too quiet, too confining. Maybe it was teenage boredom or perhaps some unconscious intuition, but something compelled me to step outside into the cool night air. I remember telling myself I was just letting our dog out to relieve himself, though in retrospect, I think I was drawn outside by something I couldn't quite articulate. As I stood on our back porch, the familiar silhouettes of trees against the night sky should have been comforting. Instead, they seemed to shift and move in ways they shouldn't have. The darkness between them appeared deeper, more absolute than usual. Something felt off, though I couldn't place exactly what had changed. Little did I understand that night would permanently alter my perception of the woods I'd grown up exploring. What I encountered would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world, and leave me questioning whether some things are better left uninvestigated. Standing on the edge of our property, I gazed into the darkness beyond our yard. The night was unusually still. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves. Even the distant music from the cabin seemed to have momentarily paused, leaving behind a vacuum of sound that pressed against my eardrums. That's when I heard it. Movement in the woods near our bonfire clearing, about 100 feet from where I stood. The bonfire area was a spot our family used for gatherings, a circular clearing surrounded by tall pines where we'd set up chairs and roast marshmallows on weekend evenings. At first, I dismissed the sounds as wildlife. Growing up in rural Florida meant coexisting with various animals, raccoons, foxes, coyotes, and the occasional wildcat. But this sound was different. The footfalls were heavier, more deliberate than any local wildlife. Whatever moved through those woods had significant weight to it, pressing dried pine needles into the earth with each step. My instincts immediately signaled danger. The rational part of my brain tried to catalog possibilities. A large dog, perhaps, or maybe a neighbor trespassing. But we were far from any walking path, and our neighbors rarely ventured into these woods, especially after dark. The movement continued, branches snapping under substantial weight. I backed toward the corner of our house, keeping my eyes fixed on the tree line. That's when I saw them. Two pale, luminous discs floating about 6 feet above the ground at the forest's edge. They resembled eyes, but were too perfectly round, too intensely bright to belong to any animal I recognized. Those eyes, if that's what they were, seemed to emit their own light rather than reflect it. They hung in the darkness like twin moons, unblinking and fixed directly on me. Despite the distance, I felt their gaze penetrating through me, studying me with cold intelligence. For several excruciating seconds, we remained locked in this standoff, me frozen in place, the entity motionless at the tree line. The boundary where our cleared property met the woods seemed to function as some invisible barrier. The thing, whatever it was, remained just beyond that threshold, as though physically unable to cross onto our land. Then it spoke. The sound that emerged from the darkness defied natural acoustics. It was simultaneously distant and right beside my ear, hollow yet resonant, like someone speaking through an old metal pipe. The voice was rough and strained, as though forcing sound through an anatomy not designed for human speech. "I see you," it said, the words unnaturally elongated. Hearing my name spoken by that voice triggered something primal inside me. Every cell in my body screamed to run, yet I remained paralyzed by fear, my muscles locked in place. "Come here," it continued. its tone shifting to something almost persuasive. "I don't want to hurt you." Its reassurance accomplished precisely the opposite of what it intended. The unnatural quality of its voice, that grating, metallic resonance, made each word feel like a physical threat. Though it remained at the tree line, I sensed its growing impatience, its desire to close the distance between us. "Here," it repeated, sharper this time, more command than invitation. The realization that this entity couldn't or wouldn't cross onto our property finally broke my paralysis. A rush of adrenaline flooded my system, briefly overwhelming my terror with youthful indignation. In that moment of misplaced courage, I committed what could have been a deadly mistake. I grabbed a rock from the ground, about half the size of my fist, and hurled it toward those glowing eyes. "Get out of here," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear despite my attempt at bravery. In the darkness, I couldn't see if my projectile found its mark, but the response was immediate and terrifying. A piercing screech erupted from the tree line, a sound so unnaturally loud and high-pitched that it seemed to vibrate the air itself. Then, impossibly, the rock I had thrown moments before whizzed past my head, missing me by mere inches before disappearing into the woods behind our house. The force behind that return throw was nothing human. No person could have hurled that rock with such velocity, such precision in complete darkness. Whatever stood watching me from the tree line wasn't just trespassing. It was something I couldn't begin to comprehend. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the handle before practically falling inside. My sister had awakened, rubbing her eyes sleepily from her place on the couch. "What's wrong?" she mumbled, still half asleep. "Nothing," I managed, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Just thought I heard something." I retreated to my bedroom, drew the curtains tight, and huddled under my blankets, listening intently for any sound that might indicate it had followed me to the house. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that I struggled to hear anything else. All I could do was wait for my family to return, hoping the night would pass without further incident. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness, every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind against the windows amplified my terror. I remained hidden beneath my covers, phone clutched in my sweating palm, debating whether to call my parents. Pride and embarrassment held me back. What would I say? That something with glowing eyes had spoken my name from the woods? That it had caught and returned my thrown rock with impossible force? Even as I experienced it, the encounter seemed too outlandish to be believed. Eventually, the sounds of vehicles on our gravel driveway announced my family's return. The relief that flooded through me was nearly overwhelming. I emerged from my room on unsteady legs to find my mother in the kitchen, putting away leftovers from the gathering. Without explanation, I wrapped my arms around her and held tight. "Thank you," I whispered, "for protecting the family." She pulled back, studying my face with concern. "What do you mean? What happened?" "I don't want to talk about it," I replied, summoning a small smile. "Just thank you." That night marked the beginning of my insomnia. Sleep refused to come as I lay staring at my ceiling, ears straining for any sound from outside. The rational part of my brain tried to explain away my experience. Maybe it was a hunter with a flashlight. Perhaps the returned rock was simply my imagination. But I knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever I'd encountered was neither natural nor easily explained. The next morning, I ventured cautiously to the spot where I'd thrown the rock. Daylight transformed the woods into something mundane and familiar, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The bonfire clearing showed no obvious signs of disturbance, no footprints or evidence of what I'd seen. This absence of proof only deepened my unease. If there were no traces, how could I convince myself or anyone else of what had happened? Over the following days, I developed new habits. I refused to go outside after sunset. My bedroom windows remained locked and curtained regardless of the stifling Florida heat. I invented excuses to avoid family campfires and outdoor gatherings. My parents attributed my behavioral changes to typical teenage moodiness, but my mother watched me with knowing eyes, sensing something had fundamentally shifted. A week passed without incident, and I began to wonder if that night had been some vivid hallucination, until the dreams began. Each night, I found myself standing at the edge of our property, facing those same luminous eyes in the darkness. In these dreams, the invisible barrier didn't hold. The entity would step into the clearing, its form remaining frustratingly indistinct, except for those eyes, and a silhouette that seemed almost but not quite human. "You threw something at me," it would say in that same unnatural voice. "Now I'll throw something at you." I would always wake just as it raised its arm to throw, gasping and drenched in sweat, convinced I could smell pine needles and damp earth in my bedroom. My academic performance suffered as exhaustion took its toll. Dark circles appeared beneath my eyes, and my once healthy appetite disappeared. My mother finally confronted me one evening, sitting on the edge of my bed with an expression of such genuine concern that my carefully constructed defenses crumbled. "Something's out there," I whispered, the admission bringing both relief and renewed terror. "In the woods. It knows my name." Instead of dismissing my fears or offering platitudes, my mother's expression darkened with recognition. She took my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't leave anything out." My mother listened without interruption as I described my encounter in detail: the unnatural movement, the glowing eyes, the impossible voice, and the returned rock. When I finished, she didn't question my sanity or offer rational explanations. Instead, she nodded slowly, her eyes focused on something distant. "The property has always been protected," she said finally. "My rituals ensure that—" Her confirmation of supernatural protection should have been comforting, but it only raised more questions. If our land was protected, what exactly was being kept at bay? And why was it targeting me specifically? Mom rose and went to her closet, returning with a worn, leather-bound book I'd never seen before. The spine was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and fragile as she carefully opened it. "Our family has lived with these woods for generations," she explained. "What you encountered isn't new to this land." She turned the book toward me. On the page was a detailed hand-drawn illustration dated 1932, depicting a tall, gaunt figure standing among trees. Its eyes were rendered as empty circles, giving it an unsettling, hollow appearance. The accompanying text described the watcher in the woods that had stalked the property's borders for as long as anyone could remember. "Your great-grandmother first documented it," Mom continued. "Every few decades it becomes more active, testing boundaries, seeking ways to cross onto protected ground. According to family records, the entity never managed to claim anyone from our bloodline, though there were accounts of missing travelers and hunters who ventured too deep into the surrounding forest. The local indigenous people had apparently warned early settlers about the area, advising them to perform specific rituals before building homes. Those who heeded the warnings thrived. Those who dismissed them often abandoned their properties after experiencing phenomena similar to what I'd witnessed. "But why now?" I asked. "Why me?" My mother's expression grew troubled. "It's drawn to certain qualities: curiosity, emotional intensity, the threshold between childhood and adulthood. You're exactly the kind of person it finds interesting." She explained that my research into the paranormal might have inadvertently attuned me to forces most people remain blissfully unaware of. By seeking knowledge of the unknown, I had potentially made myself visible to it. "What exactly is it?" I pressed, needing to understand the threat I faced. My mother chose her words carefully. "The settlers called it many things: watcher, stalker, collector of souls. The indigenous people had their own name for it that roughly translates to the hungry one. But names have power, and it's dangerous to speak of such things too directly." She closed the book. "What matters is understanding how to stay protected. You challenged it, drew its attention more fully to you. Now we need to strengthen our defenses." That night, my mother taught me the protective rituals that had been passed down through generations of our family. We burned specific herbs, spoke ancient words in languages I didn't recognize, and placed symbolic objects at crucial points around our property. The ritual felt simultaneously primitive and profound, connecting me to ancestors who had faced the same entity centuries before. As we worked, my mother revealed more family history, stories of close calls, of relatives who had glimpsed the entity during particularly vulnerable moments in their lives. Some had heard it mimic loved ones' voices to lure them into the woods. Others had found strange arrangements of sticks and stones on the property boundaries, apparent attempts to disrupt the protective barriers. "Remember," my mother cautioned, "it can't enter our land uninvited. It can't cross the threshold unless welcomed. But it's patient and clever, and it will use your fears and weaknesses against you." As we completed the final elements of the ritual near the tree line, I felt the weight of countless generations who had performed these same actions to keep their families safe. For the first time since my encounter, I felt a measure of control returning. Not enough to eliminate my fear, but sufficient to face another night with something resembling courage. "Will this stop the dreams?" I asked as we gathered our supplies. My mother's hesitation told me everything before she answered. "The dreams are its attempt to reach you through means that don't require physical crossing. Your mind remains your own territory to defend." That night, exhaustion finally overcame fear, and I fell into deep sleep. The entity visited my dreams as expected, but something had changed. The barrier between us remained intact, and I sensed frustration emanating from those glowing eyes as they watched me from the darkness. "Your mother can't protect you forever," it said, its voice somehow clearer in the dreamscape. "Eventually, you'll come to me." For the first time, I found my voice in the dream. "Never." The eyes narrowed, and I detected something new in its demeanor. Respect, perhaps, or reassessment. It hadn't expected resistance. Before the dream faded, I heard its final words. "We have time. I've waited for generations. I can wait for you." 2 weeks passed with relative calm. The dreams continued, but lost their terrifying edge as I learned to recognize them as battlegrounds rather than helpless nightmares. During daylight hours, I could almost convince myself the entire experience had been exaggerated by an overactive imagination. Almost. Then came the gifts. The first appeared on our front porch one morning, a precisely arranged collection of small animal bones forming an intricate pattern. My father dismissed it as the work of local kids playing pranks, sweeping the bones away before I could examine them closely. But I recognized the deliberate placement, the unnatural symmetry that no child could have achieved. 3 days later, I found a dead fox placed at the exact spot where I had stood during my initial encounter. Its body was unmarked, showing no wounds or signs of predation, yet its eyes had been removed with surgical precision. The discovery sent me retching into the bushes while my older brother disposed of the carcass. "This isn't funny anymore," he told my parents that evening. "Someone's targeting our house." They called the sheriff, who dutifully took notes and promised to increase patrols on our road. But I knew law enforcement couldn't protect us from what lurked in those woods. The entity was escalating, growing more bold in its attempts to provoke a response, specifically from me. The following weekend, my parents insisted I accompany them to a neighbor's gathering, hoping to break my self-imposed isolation. I reluctantly agreed, finding temporary comfort in daylight and the company of others. As afternoon faded into evening, however, my anxiety mounted. By sunset, I was visibly agitated, checking my watch and suggesting we leave before darkness fully descended. My mother recognized my distress and made excuses to our hosts. As we walked toward our car, I felt eyes on me. Not the supernatural gaze from the woods, but human observation. A neighbor's son, about 20 years old, approached me while my parents chatted with other adults. "You're the kid who's been seeing things in the woods, right?" he asked without preamble. My surprise must have shown on my face because he quickly added, "Word gets around. My grandfather used to talk about something similar when I was younger." Against my better judgment, I found myself asking, "What did he say about it?" The young man, whose name was apparently forbidden to mention, glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. He called it the collector, said it gathered things that interested it, sometimes objects, sometimes animals, sometimes people. A chill washed over me despite the warm evening air. My grandfather claimed he encountered it when he was about your age, he continued. Said it spoke to him, tried to convince him to walk into the woods at night. He refused, but his friend didn't. He paused, looking uncomfortable. They never found his friend. That's just a local legend, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He shrugged. Maybe. But grandfather never went into those woods again, not even during hunting season, and he made us promise the same. As we drove home in the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the young man's words. The possibility that others had encountered the entity both validated my experience and deepened my dread. If the stories were true, this thing had been hunting in these woods for generations, and sometimes successfully. That night, I lay awake long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at my ceiling and listening. Around 2 a.m., a soft tapping began at my window, gentle, rhythmic, almost polite. I knew without looking what would be there. The curtains remained closed, but in my mind's eye, I could see those luminous orbs floating outside the glass. The tapping continued for nearly an hour, occasionally interspersed with the sound of my name being called in that horribly familiar voice. Eventually it stopped, replaced by silence so absolute it seemed to have weight. I must have drifted off because I woke suddenly to find myself standing in our front yard, the cool grass beneath my bare feet. Moonlight illuminated the clearing enough to see that I was mere steps from the tree line. Ahead, just within the shadows of the forest, those pale eyes watched me. With horror, I realized I had sleepwalked dangerously close to crossing the boundary. The entity had nearly succeeded in luring me beyond protection while my conscious defenses were lowered. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on those glowing orbs until I reached our front door. Inside, I woke my mother in a panic, explaining what had happened. Her face paled as she realized the entity had found a new strategy. If it couldn't cross onto our property, it would try to draw me off it. We need to take more drastic measures, she decided, her voice tight with concern. This has gone beyond simple boundary protections. My mother spent the following day gathering supplies and consulting her books. That evening, she informed the family we would be performing a more powerful ritual, one specifically designed to reveal what we faced so we could defend against it more effectively. Knowledge is power, she explained as we gathered in the living room. If we can see it clearly, understand what draws it to us, we gain advantage. My father, always supportive of my mother's practices despite his own skepticism, helped arrange candles in a specific pattern. My siblings looked uneasy but participated without complaint. They had witnessed enough strange occurrences recently to take the threat seriously. As darkness fell, we began the ritual. My mother burned herbs that filled the house with sweet, earthy smoke. She spoke words in that same ancient language, her voice growing stronger with each phrase. The atmosphere in the room changed subtly. The air felt thicker, charged with potential. Now, she instructed me, think about your encounters. Recall every detail, the sounds, the sensations, the exact words it spoke to you. I closed my eyes and concentrated, mentally revisiting each interaction with the entity. As the memories surfaced, the candle flame suddenly stretched upward, burning with unusual intensity. It's responding, my mother whispered. It feels our attention. A low, humming vibration filled the room, making the windows rattle slightly in their frames. The temperature dropped noticeably, our breath becoming visible in the suddenly chilled air. What's happening? My father asked, his customary calm faltering. My mother's expression was one of fierce concentration. We're pulling back the veil, seeing through its disguise. The smoke from the herbs began swirling unnaturally, condensing into a vaguely humanoid shape in the center of our circle. Within this smoky silhouette, 2 points of light appeared. those same pale, luminous discs that had watched me from the woods. "Why have you come to this family?" my mother demanded, her voice commanding. The smoke figure wavered, and that now familiar voice emerged, but clearer, less strained than I had heard before. "I have always been here," it replied. "Long before your family, before any settlers. This land remembers me." "What do you want with my child?" my mother pressed. The smoke shifted, those glowing eyes turning directly toward me. Potential, curiosity, youth, things I have lost. A sudden realization hit me. This entity wasn't necessarily malevolent in the way I had imagined. It was ancient, alienating, frightening in its otherness. But its interest in me wasn't simply predatory. It was drawn to qualities I possessed that it recognized or perhaps coveted. "Are you human?" I found myself asking. "Were you ever human?" The smoke rippled, almost like laughter. "I was. Long ago, before time was measured as you measure it." My mother tensed beside me. "A human who became something else," she murmured. "Through choice or circumstance?" "Choice," the voice confirmed. "Always choice. As your child will have choice." The implication chilled me more deeply than any supernatural encounter. This entity believed I could or would become like it someday. That my fascination with the unknown might lead me down a path similar to whatever transformation it had undergone. "I don't want what you're offering," I stated firmly. The smoke figure inclined what passed for its head. "Yet? You don't want it yet. But curiosity grows. Questions multiply. Ordinary existence dulls. I have watched your kind for centuries. I recognize the signs." My mother stepped forward, placing herself between me and the apparition. "You will not have my child. Not through force, manipulation, or temptation. This family stands protected." The smoke began to dissipate, those glowing eyes dimming slightly. Before it fully vanished, the entity spoke one final time. "Protection doesn't last forever. Generations pass, knowledge fades, I remain." With those words, the smoke scattered, the candles extinguished simultaneously, and the temperature gradually returned to normal. We sat in stunned silence for several moments before my father switched on the lights. "Did we banish it?" my younger sister asked hopefully. My mother's expression was somber. "No, we merely understood it better. And it understood us." That night, for the first time since my initial encounter, I slept without dreaming of glowing eyes or voices from the darkness. But this absence brought no comfort. I sensed the entity had simply changed tactics once again, settling in for a longer game than I had initially realized. The revelation that our unwelcome watcher had once been human transformed my fear into something more complex. Horror remained, certainly, but now accompanied by uncomfortable curiosity. What process could change a person into such an entity? How long had it existed in this in-between state, neither fully human nor supernatural? Most disturbingly, what had it recognized in me that suggested I might follow a similar path? These questions consumed my thoughts in the days following our ritual. I delved deeper into my mother's books, searching for historical accounts that might explain the entity's origins. Among her collection, I discovered a journal dating back to the early 1800s, written by a settler who had originally claimed our land. The journal detailed the writer's encounters with local indigenous people who warned about the area's dangerous history. According to their oral traditions, a medicine man from centuries earlier had sought immortality through forbidden rituals. He achieved his goal, but at terrible cost, becoming untethered from humanity, unable to fully exist in either the physical or spiritual realm. Condemned to haunt the boundaries between worlds, he developed an obsession with those who showed similar spiritual inclinations. The account aligned disturbingly well with our experiences. The entity that watched our property wasn't some ancient evil or mythological creature. It had been a person who made catastrophic choices in pursuit of knowledge beyond natural limits. Armed with this information, I approached my mother. "It's targeting me because it thinks I'm like it was," I explained. "Because I researched the supernatural, Because I'm drawn to understanding things beyond normal experience. She nodded slowly. That's what I feared. It recognizes something in your spirit, a kinship or potential for kinship. How do I convince it it's wrong? I asked. How do I make it understand I don't want whatever transformation it underwent? My mother considered this carefully. You must confront it directly, not in dreams or through ritual, but at the boundary where it dwells. You must reject its offer explicitly, with absolute conviction. The thought of deliberately seeking another encounter terrified me, but I recognized the necessity. This entity wouldn't simply lose interest or find another target. It had fixated on me specifically, and only direct rejection might dissuade it. We planned the confrontation meticulously. My mother strengthened the protective boundaries around our property and prepared me with specific phrases and gestures that would reinforce my rejection. The confrontation would occur at dawn, a time of transition when the entity might be more visible, but less powerful than during full darkness. The appointed morning arrived clear and cool. I stood at the edge of our property as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. My mother waited on the porch close enough to intervene if necessary, but giving me space to face this challenge alone. As the forest gradually emerged from darkness, I sensed rather than saw the entity's approach. The air grew noticeably colder, and birds that had begun their morning songs suddenly fell silent. Then, at the precise boundary between our cleared land and the woods, the familiar glowing eyes materialized. "I know what you were," I called out, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know what you want from me." The entity moved closer than it had ever ventured before, its form becoming slightly more distinct in the growing light. A tall, emaciated silhouette with disproportionately long limbs and those unnatural eyes. "Then you understand the opportunity," it replied, its voice less distorted than during our previous encounters. "Few are offered such knowledge." "I understand the cost," I countered. "I've read about what you sacrificed. That's not a path I'll ever choose." The entity went still, those luminous eyes narrowing slightly. "You cannot know what you might choose in time. Decades of ordinary existence, the slow decay of body and mind, the limitations of human perception. These burdens grow heavier with age." "They're not burdens," I insisted. "They're what make us human. Connection, change, even mortality, they give life meaning." "Meaning is subjective," it responded. "What meaning remains when everyone you know has returned to dust, when civilizations rise and fall before your eyes? I have witnessed more than you can imagine." "And you've experienced none of it," I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "You watch, but cannot participate. That's your punishment, eternal observation without connection." The entity's form wavered slightly, the first indication I'd struck a nerve. "I reject your interest in me," I continued, emboldened. "I reject any kinship between us. I choose humanity, fully, completely, with all its limitations and endings." "You choose ignorance," it hissed, moving restlessly at the boundary. "I choose life," I corrected. "Real life, not your half-existence." The confrontation continued as the sun climbed higher, the entity becoming less distinct in the growing daylight. Its arguments grew more desperate, alternating between temptation and threats. But I remained resolute. With each rejection, its form seemed to diminish slightly, retreating incrementally toward the deeper shadows. Finally, as full morning light flooded the clearing, it spoke its parting words. "Time will test your conviction. I will be watching when doubt finds you." Then it was gone, leaving only a lingering coldness that gradually dissipated in the warming air. My mother joined me, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. "You did well," she said softly. "But remember its final warning. This isn't a single battle won, but the beginning of vigilance." I nodded, understanding the entity might never fully abandon its interest in me. The connection had been established. I would need to reaffirm my choice periodically throughout my life. 10 years have passed since that confrontation at the edge of our property. My life progressed along predictably human paths: college, career, relationships, all the ordinary triumphs and disappointments that constitute a normal existence. I moved away from that rural Florida house, establishing my own home in a different state, deliberately choosing a place with minimal forest coverage and abundant neighbors. Yet I never completely escaped the watcher's influence. During particularly vulnerable moments, times of significant loss, periods of existential questioning, I sometimes glimpse those luminous eyes in darkened windows, or feel that distinctive coldness brushing against my consciousness. These episodes are brief and increasingly rare, but they serve as reminders that some connections, once formed, never completely dissolve. My mother continues to maintain the protective boundaries around our family home, refreshing the ancient rituals each season. She once confided that previous generations experienced similar targeted interest from the entity, suggesting it cycles through our family line, seeking potential converts every few decades. Your grandmother faced it in her youth, she told me during a recent visit, and her grandmother before her, always drawn to the most spiritually sensitive among us. I've maintained a journal documenting my experiences, adding to the family record that stretches back centuries. Future generations should know what watches from the woods, should understand the temptations it offers, and the true nature of its existence. Knowledge remains our strongest defense, not the forbidden knowledge it promised, but practical understanding of the threat and its limitations. My research into the paranormal continues, though with greater caution and stronger boundaries. I no longer approach the subject with naive fascination, but with respectful distance. Some mysteries are better appreciated from afar, some thresholds better left uncrossed. Occasionally, I wonder about the entity's origins, the human it once was, the choices that transformed it into its current state. In unguarded moments, I find myself speculating about its lonely existence, traversing the boundaries between worlds, watching life unfold but unable to participate. There exists a peculiar tragedy in its condition that occasionally evokes unwelcome sympathy. These moments of empathy concern me most, suggesting the entity correctly identified something in my nature that resembles its former self, a dangerous curiosity that could, under different circumstances, lead down similar paths. The recognition of this potential affinity serves as my most important safeguard, a constant reminder of what I might become if I pursued knowledge without ethical constraints. When I visit my childhood home, I no longer fear the forest that surrounds it. I respect its dangers, but understand my power to reject what lurks within. The boundary between our property and those woods represents more than physical separation. It delineates a crucial philosophical choice between participation in human existence, with all its limitations, and the cold observation of immortality without connection. Sometimes, standing at that boundary during daylight hours, I speak aloud to the watcher I know still lingers among the trees. I describe the richness of human experience, the connections formed, the growth achieved, even the poignant beauty of transience. Whether these monologues reach their intended audience, I cannot say, but they reinforce my commitment to the path I've chosen. God alone knows what truly awaits beyond mortal existence, but I've concluded that rushing toward such knowledge through forbidden means creates something neither human nor divine, just the hollow observer my family has contended with for generations. The entity was right about one thing: time tests conviction. Each passing year brings new questions, new awareness of mortality's approach. Yet these challenges strengthen rather than weaken my resolve. I choose the finite but fully experienced human journey over eternal shadow existence. Those glowing eyes may continue watching from forest edges and darkened corners throughout my life, but they observe someone firmly committed to remaining human, with all the wonder, connection, and yes, eventual ending that entails. In this conscious choice renewed daily, I have found freedom from fear. The watcher remains as it has for centuries, but now serves as a reminder rather than a threat, a stark illustration of what awaits those who seek to transcend humanity through isolation rather than connection, through observation without participation, through endless duration without genuine growth. And so our strange relationship continues, the watcher and the watched, each making fundamentally different choices about what constitutes a meaningful existence. In that philosophical gulf between us lies the essence of what it means to embrace our humanity, limitations and all. The Navajo National Forest wasn't my first choice for a solo backpacking trip, but after 3 months of grinding at the software company, I needed somewhere remote, somewhere I could disconnect entirely. My research suggested this lesser-known trail system would offer solitude without the crowds that plagued more popular destinations. I parked at the trailhead around noon on Friday. The lot was empty except for a forest ranger's truck parked near the information board. The ranger, a weathered man in his 50s, was replacing some faded notices when I approached. "Planning to camp out there?" he asked, eyeing my pack. 3 days, 2 nights, I confirmed, taking the northern loop toward Black Crest Ridge. He stopped what he was doing, his expression shifting. "That area's had some issues lately. Mountain lion sightings. Might want to consider the eastern trails instead." "I've dealt with mountain lions in Colorado," I said, adjusting my backpack straps. "Got proper food storage and bear spray." The ranger seemed to measure his words carefully. "It's not just wildlife. We've had some unusual reports from hikers, strange noises at night. One couple came back early because they felt like they were being watched." I smiled politely. Every remote area had its local legends. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll keep my eyes open." He nodded, clearly seeing I wouldn't be dissuaded. "Just stay on marked trails and make plenty of noise while you hike. And if anything feels off." He paused. "Trust your instincts." The trail started easily enough, winding through sun-dappled pine forest. The April air was cool but comfortable for hiking, and the scent of pine sap and earth filled my lungs. This was exactly what I needed. No Zoom calls, no deadlines, no artificial light. Just wilderness. 3 hours in, the trail steepened as it climbed toward the ridge. I stopped at a lookout point, drinking water and taking photos of the vast forest spreading below. The solitude was perfect. Not another human for miles. That's when I noticed something odd. About 50 yards down the slope, a cluster of branches had been arranged in a pattern that seemed too deliberate to be natural, crossed in an X shape and propped against a boulder. Probably trail maintenance, I reasoned, or perhaps another hiker's marker. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered overhead. I quickened my pace, wanting to reach my planned camping spot before the storm hit. The trail narrowed, hemmed in by dense underbrush, and the forest grew quieter. No birdsong, no rustling in the leaves. Just the sound of my boots on dirt and the distant rumble of thunder. I reached the camping area, a small clearing near a stream, just as the first raindrops fell. Working quickly, I set up my tent, secured a rainfly, and organized my gear inside. The rain intensified, drumming against the nylon as I heated water for my freeze-dried meal. As darkness fell, the storm passed, leaving behind a heavy silence. I switched on my headlamp and ventured out to hang my food bag, a necessary precaution against bears and smaller critters. The forest around the clearing seemed different somehow. The darkness between the trees felt denser, more watchful. While securing the rope over a branch, I heard it, a sound like nothing I'd encountered before, not quite human, not quite animal. A long, wavering cry that seemed to start as a whistle and end as something like laughter. It came from the ridge above my camp, perhaps half a mile away. Coyote, I told myself, or maybe an owl with an unusual call. The ranger's warning about mountain lions flashed through my mind, but this didn't sound feline. Back in my tent, I recorded the day's hike in my journal, noting coordinates and landmarks. I added a brief mention of the strange sound, describing it as objectively as possible. Outside, the forest had gone silent again, except for the occasional drip of rainwater from leaves. Just as I was zipping up my sleeping bag, my headlamp caught something outside, a shadow moving past my tent, too large for a raccoon or fox. I froze, listening intently. Slow, deliberate footsteps circled the perimeter of my campsite, crunching softly on pine needles. They paused directly behind my tent. I reached for my knife and bear spray, heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps resumed, moving away toward the trees. When I finally gathered the courage to unzip the tent and shine my light into the darkness, the clearing was empty. But something had changed. My food bag, which I'd hung carefully from a branch 15 feet high, now lay on the ground, its contents scattered. The rope hadn't broken, it had been untied. I slept fitfully, if at all. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf jolted me awake. Around 3 a.m., I gave up entirely and sat cross-legged in my sleeping bag, knife within reach, listening to the night. The rational part of my brain suggested a bear had gotten my food. They're surprisingly dexterous when motivated by hunger. But bears don't untie knots. Dawn brought heavy fog and a sense of unreality to the forest. I emerged from my tent to survey the damage. Most of my food was gone, though oddly some items remained untouched. A packet of instant coffee, 2 energy bars. The rope lay coiled neatly at the base of the tree, not torn or chewed through, untied and coiled. I documented everything with my camera, more out of habit than any expectation it would help. The ground revealed nothing, no footprints, no claw marks, just pine needles and damp earth. I searched the surrounding area for tracks but found only deer prints and what might have been coyote. My options were limited. With food for maybe one day if I rationed carefully, I could either continue my planned route or head back to the trailhead. Pride suggested pushing forward. I'd been in tough situations before, but something about this place had shifted from peaceful to threatening. I decided to modify my route. Instead of the full northern loop, I'd cut across to the eastern trail the ranger had suggested, which would eventually connect back to the trailhead. It meant one more night in the forest instead of 2, and I'd have to push harder than planned, but it felt like the right compromise. As I packed up camp, something caught my eye, a dark smudge on my tent's rainfly. At first glance, it looked like dirt or tree sap, but when I touched it, my fingers came away with a rust-colored powder. It smelled metallic, like dried blood. I packed quickly after that, checking my map and compass obsessively. The fog limited visibility to about 30 yards, transforming familiar trees into looming specters. I started hiking east, marking my path with my GPS app whenever I had enough signal. Around midday, the fog began to lift, revealing glimpses of the ridge above. I stopped for a break, rationing 1 energy bar into tiny portions. As I ate, I noticed unusual marks on several tree trunks nearby. 3 parallel scratches too high for a bear on its hind legs, too deliberate for random damage. The silence of the forest remained unnatural. No birds, no insects, just the occasional whisper of wind through pine needles. I pressed on, determined to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. The cross-country route proved more challenging than expected. What looked like passable terrain on the map turned into steep ravines and dense thickets in reality. By late afternoon, I'd made less progress than hoped and faced a decision: push through twilight hours with my headlamp or make camp early. The memory of last night's visitor made me choose the former. I'd rather navigate difficult terrain than spend another night being circled. As the light faded, I reached a small clearing with a fallen log. Taking a brief rest, I checked my coordinates again. I was still on course, though moving slower than planned. That's when I noticed movement at the tree line, just a flicker in my peripheral vision. I turned quickly, scanning the darkening forest. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I stood, shouldering my pack. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding small in the vast silence. "Anyone there?" The forest absorbed my words without echo. I took out my headlamp, switching it to its brightest setting. The beam cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating tree trunks and undergrowth. At the edge of its reach, something moved again, a pale shape ducking behind a tree. "I see you," I said, more confidently than I felt. "I'm just passing through, not looking for trouble." No response. Just that prickling sensation of eyes watching from the shadows. I decided to keep moving, making more noise than necessary, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, occasionally clearing my throat. The traditional advice for avoiding wildlife encounters. But whatever was following me didn't behave like wildlife. As full darkness descended, the forest changed character completely. My headlamp created a small bubble of visibility, beyond which anything could be hiding. I tripped twice on exposed roots, barely catching myself. The third time, my ankle twisted painfully and I dropped to one knee, swearing under my breath. I needed to stop. Continuing in these conditions was asking for a serious injury. I found a small depression sheltered by boulders. Not ideal, but better than open ground. Without a tent, I'd left it behind to move faster. I laid out my emergency bivy sack and crawled inside, positioning myself to see the approach from any direction. The night sounds emerged slowly, wind in the trees, a distant owl, the occasional scurrying of small animals. Almost normal except for one thing. Every few minutes a twig would snap or a stone would shift, always from a different direction. The sounds formed a perimeter around my position, methodically circling. I clutched my bear spray, wondering if it would work on whatever was out there. Around midnight, the circling stopped. The forest fell absolutely silent. Then came a sound directly above me, breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths from the boulder overlooking my shelter. I didn't move, didn't speak, just waited, every muscle tense, for whatever would happen next. Nothing did. The breathing continued for perhaps 5 minutes, then stopped. No footsteps moving away. No indication that whatever it was had left. Just sudden, complete absence. When I finally gathered the courage to shine my light on the boulder, nothing was there. But on the ground beside my bivvy, something had been placed while I wasn't looking. A small, perfectly preserved rabbit, its neck broken cleanly. Not eaten, not bloody, just killed and delivered like a gift, or a warning. The rest of the night passed in a blur of hypervigilance and exhaustion. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, just lay listening to every sound while clutching my bear spray. The rabbit remained where it had been placed, a disturbing reminder that whatever was out there could have reached me anytime it wanted. First light couldn't come soon enough. I packed quickly, leaving the rabbit untouched. My ankle throbbed from yesterday's fall, but adrenaline dulled the pain. According to my map, the eastern trail should be less than 2 miles ahead. If I pushed hard, I could reach it by mid-morning and be back at the trailhead by evening. The forest seemed different in daylight, less threatening but somehow more insidious. The unnatural silence had returned. No birds announced the dawn. No squirrels chattered in the branches. Even the wind had died, leaving the trees motionless. I maintained a brisk pace despite my ankle, stopping only to check coordinates and sip water. Around a bend in an animal trail I'd been following, I came upon something unexpected. A rock face covered in petroglyphs. They weren't mentioned in any of my research about the area. The images were weathered but distinct. Stylized human figures with elongated limbs, animals that might have been deer or elk, and spiraling patterns that could represent water or wind. But one figure dominated the composition. A tall, stick-like humanoid with a head that wasn't quite human. More like a deer or wolf skull perched on a too-thin neck. I photographed the petroglyphs methodically, fascinated despite my situation. Based on the style, they appeared to be Native American, possibly hundreds of years old. I'm no anthropologist, but I'd seen similar imagery in museums. The elongated figure reminded me of descriptions I'd read of skinwalkers. Shapeshifters from Navajo legend said to wear animal skins to transform themselves. Just folklore, I reminded myself. Stories to explain predators or human criminals who targeted isolated travelers. As I stepped back from the rock face, something crunched under my boot. Looking down, I found myself standing on a scattering of small bones. Rodents, mostly, but some larger. All had been broken and arranged in patterns that mirrored the petroglyphs above. This was recent, very recent. The bones were still white, not yet weathered by exposure. I backed away, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. The rock face formed one wall of a small canyon, a natural trap with limited escape routes. I turned to retrace my steps and found the path blocked. A man stood there. At least I thought it was a man. The right height and build, wearing what looked like tattered clothing. But he stood unnaturally still, and his face. I couldn't make out his features clearly. He was about 30 yards away, partially obscured by a pine tree. Something seemed wrong about the proportions of his limbs. Too long, too thin, and he made no sound. No rustling clothes, no breathing, no shifting weight. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm just passing through, heading back to the trailhead." No response, no movement. I took a step sideways, planning to circle around him. He mirrored my movement precisely, maintaining the distance between us. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, louder this time. "I'm just a hiker who's lost his way a bit." The figure tilted its head at an angle that seemed to strain the limits of human anatomy. Then it stepped sideways behind the pine tree and didn't emerge on the other side. I waited, holding my breath. 10 seconds. 20. I edged forward cautiously, scanning the forest. Nothing. I reached the pine tree and circled it. No footprints, no disturbed ground, no indication anyone had been there at all. My rational mind suggested explanations. A trick of light and shadow. A park ranger observing from a distance. My own sleep-deprived brain manufacturing threats. But none of these accounted for the arranged bones, the untied food bag, the dead rabbit left beside me in the night. I abandoned all pretense of calm and began jogging eastward, ignoring the pain in my ankle. The terrain sloped upward, becoming rockier and more exposed. Good. Fewer places for something to hide. Bad. Fewer escape options if cornered. Around noon, I crested a small rise and finally spotted what I'd been searching for. The Eastern Trail, a clear path cutting through the forest below. I nearly cried with relief. Established trails meant other hikers, safety in numbers, a direct route back to civilization. As I descended toward it, movement caught my eye. Actual human hikers, a group of 3, moving along the trail with normal backpacks and trekking poles. I waved frantically, shouting to attract their attention, not caring how deranged I might appear. They stopped, looking up toward me with evident confusion. One raised a hand in tentative greeting. I scrambled down the slope, half running, half sliding, desperate to reach them before they continued on. "Thank God," I gasped as I reached the trail. "I thought I was alone out here." The hikers, 2 women and a man in their 30s, exchanged glances. "You okay, buddy?" the man asked. "You look like you've had a rough time." I must have been a sight. Unshaven, wild-eyed, clothes stained with dirt and sweat. I tried to modulate my voice to sound less unhinged. "Got a bit lost, had some strange experiences up there." "Like what?" one of the women asked, her expression somewhere between concern and wariness. How to explain without sounding completely insane. "Food got taken from my camp, heard weird noises, felt like something was following me." "Probably a bear," the man said reasonably. "They're pretty clever about getting food." I hesitated, then decided against mentioning the figure by the petroglyphs or the dead rabbit. Instead, I asked, "You heading toward the trailhead?" They nodded. "About 4 hours away at our pace. You're welcome to join us." I nearly collapsed with relief. 4 hours. Just 4 more hours and I'd be back at my car, driving away from this place. We set off together, the normal conversation of the hiking group, discussing trail conditions, comparing gear, sharing previous adventures, washing over me like a cleansing wave. For the first time in 2 days, I felt my guard lowering slightly. Whatever had been stalking me seemed unlikely to approach a group. As we walked, I gradually shared more details of my experience, carefully avoiding the most disturbing elements. "This area does have some weird stories," the second woman acknowledged. A guy at the ranger station mentioned some local legend about a watcher in the woods, Native American thing apparently. "What kind of watcher?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She shrugged. Some kind of spirit that guards sacred sites. He didn't go into detail, just mentioned it when warning us to stay on marked trails. The conversation drifted to other topics. The sun emerged from behind clouds, warming the path. Birds called from the trees, normal forest sounds returning as if they'd never been absent. I began to wonder if I'd overreacted, if exhaustion and isolation had magnified ordinary wilderness encounters into something sinister. Then one of the women stopped suddenly, pointing ahead. "What's that on the trail?" About 20 yards ahead, something lay across the path. As we approached, I recognized it with sickening clarity. A freshly killed deer, its neck broken at an impossible angle. Just like the rabbit, the animal's eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the forest canopy. No blood, no signs of feeding, just killed and placed deliberately in our path. "That's not normal predator behavior," the man said quietly. "No," I agreed, "it's not." We stood in silence, 4 humans suddenly aware of how far we were from safety. In the trees beyond the deer, something moved, just a shadow shifting between trunks, watching us, waiting to see what we would do. "We should keep moving," the man said, his voice tighter than before. "That's not a natural kill." None of us wanted to approach the deer, so we left the trail briefly, circling through the underbrush to avoid it. As we passed, I noticed something I hadn't seen from a distance. A pattern of broken twigs had been arranged on the deer's body. The same spiral pattern from the petroglyphs. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, pointing. They followed my gaze, but the woman closest to me shook her head. "See what?" I looked again. The pattern was gone, just random broken branches scattered by the wind. Had I imagined it? The lack of sleep was affecting my perception. We continued more quickly now, our earlier casual pace replaced by something more urgent. Conversation died. Each of us scanned the forest continuously, jerking toward any unexpected sound. The trail began to seem impossibly long, each turn revealing only more wilderness, not the promised trailhead. "Check the map again," one of the women suggested to her companion. "This doesn't feel right." The man pulled out his phone, checking the GPS. His expression changed. "That's weird. According to this, we've barely moved for the last hour." "That's impossible," I said, looking over his shoulder at the screen. "We've been walking steadily." He showed me the map. The blue dot indicating our position hovered near the same coordinates I'd recorded 2 hours earlier. Either the GPS was malfunctioning, or something impossible was happening. "Let me check mine," I said, pulling out my phone. No signal, but the GPS still worked. According to my device, we were exactly where we should be, 4 miles closer to the trailhead than his phone suggested. We compared the 2 screens, baffled by the discrepancy. Then, one of the women spotted a trail marker, a blue blaze painted on a tree trunk. "Look," she said, "number 14. What number was the last one we passed?" No one had been counting. We backtracked slightly and found another marker, number 14 again. "That's not possible," the man said, looking from one marker to the other. "They're sequential along the trail." We pressed on, checking every marker we passed. All number 14, as if we were walking in circles despite following a straight path. The light began to fade. None of us had planned to camp overnight. The women and man were on a day hike, and I was supposed to reach my car by evening. We had headlamps, but minimal overnight gear between us. "We need to make a decision," the man said finally. "Either we keep pushing to the trailhead, or we make camp and continue at first light." The thought of spending another night in these woods made my skin crawl. "I vote we keep moving," I said immediately. The others agreed. We switched on headlamps and continued, staying closer together now. The forest pressed in around our small circles of light. Occasionally, one of us would freeze, claiming to have seen movement in the periphery of their vision. Each time, we'd stop, directing all 4 headlamps toward the spot. Each time, we'd find nothing. Around 9 p.m., one of the women stopped abruptly. "Listen," she whispered. We fell silent. At first, I heard nothing. Then it came, that same sound I'd heard the first night. the whistle that became a laugh echoing through the trees. Much closer now. "What the hell was that?" the man hissed. "That's what I heard before," I said, "when I was alone." The sound came again, from a different direction, then another, from somewhere else, as if we were being surrounded. "Run," one of the women said suddenly. "Just run." We broke into a sprint, abandoning all pretense of calm. The trail blurred beneath our headlamp beams. Branches whipped at our faces. Behind us, those sounds multiplied, not following exactly, but pacing us, sometimes cutting ahead. I don't know how long we ran. Time lost meaning in the panic and exertion. Eventually, we burst into a small clearing and stopped, gasping for breath, backs together like animals at bay. The sounds had stopped. The forest was silent again. Our headlamps created a small island of light in a sea of darkness. What are those things?" one of the women asked between breaths. No one answered. No one had an explanation that made sense. "We stick together," the man said finally. "No matter what, that's our only chance." We agreed, forming a tight group as we continued down the trail at a fast walk, each of us scanning a different direction. My headlamp began to flicker, batteries failing after too many hours of continuous use. The others shared the same problem. One by one, our lights weakened, shrinking our visible world. That's when we saw it. Not in the trees or on the trail, but standing directly in our path. The figure I'd glimpsed by the petroglyphs. Except now, I could see it clearly, in our combined headlamp beams. It stood over 6 feet tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like tattered animal hides. But most disturbing was its head. Not human at all, but a deer skull, complete with antlers, perched on a too long neck. The empty eye socket somehow conveyed watchfulness, intelligence. We froze collectively, instinctively huddling closer. The figure remained motionless, blocking the trail. "What do we do?" one of the women whispered. "I don't," the man began. The figure tilted its head at that unnatural angle I'd seen before. Then it raised one elongated arm and pointed into the forest, away from the trail. "I think it wants us to go that way," I said quietly. "No way," the man responded. "We stay on the trail." The figure stepped toward us, a jerking, uneven movement that triggered every primal fear response in my body. We backed away collectively. It advanced again. This bizarre, silent confrontation continued for several minutes, the entity herding us steadily away from the trail. "Maybe it's trying to help us," one of the women suggested desperately. "Maybe the trail's washed out ahead or something." None of us believed that. But we had few options. Our headlamps were failing. We were exhausted, lost, and confronted by something that defied explanation. When the figure gestured again toward the forest, we reluctantly complied, stepping off the trail. It followed, maintaining a precise distance behind us. Whenever we slowed or changed direction, it made that same pointing gesture, correcting our course. We were being led somewhere specific. After what seemed like hours, we reached another rock formation, a natural arch formed by 2 massive boulders. Petroglyphs similar to the ones I'd seen earlier covered its surface, barely visible in our dying lights. The figure stopped, pointing at the arch. "It wants us to go through," I said. "This is insane," the man replied. "We're following directions from whatever this thing is." One of the women's headlamps failed completely, plunging a quarter of our world into darkness. "I don't think we have a choice," she said. We passed beneath the arch one by one, entering a small canyon beyond. The walls rose steeply on either side, lined with more petroglyphs, hundreds of them, depicting scenes of hunting, celestial events, and that same elongated figure with the animal skull head. At the canyon's end stood a sight that made us stop in disbelief: my car, and beyond it, the trailhead parking lot. Somehow, impossibly, we had been led directly back to our starting point, through terrain that should have taken hours to traverse. We turned to look at our guide, but the figure had vanished. Just empty forest behind us, no sign that anything had ever been there. "This isn't possible," the man said, voicing what we were all thinking. But the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, the entity had known exactly where we needed to go and had brought us there by a route no map showed. As we approached the parking lot on shaky legs, I noticed something on my windshield, a small bundle of twigs and leaves tied with sinew. A Native American protective charm, I'd later learn. Similar bundles had been placed on the other hikers' vehicles. We stood in silence, 4 people trying to process an experience that defied rational explanation. The trailhead information board caught my eye, specifically a notice I hadn't seen when I arrived. Respect sacred sites. Some areas within the forest hold cultural significance to Native peoples. Visitors are asked to remain on marked trails and report any historical artifacts to ranger station personnel. I remembered the petroglyphs, the arranged bones, the patterns. Had I inadvertently trespassed on something sacred? Had the entity been protecting its territory rather than hunting us? The others were already moving toward their car, eager to leave this place behind. Before joining them, I took one last look at the forest edge. Just for a moment, I thought I saw that distinctive silhouette, watching from between the trees, the guardian of boundaries I'd crossed without understanding. I didn't sleep that night, even in the relative safety of a motel room 20 miles from the trailhead. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that deer skull face, those empty sockets somehow watching, judging. The others had left immediately, heading back to Phoenix without even exchanging contact information, as if acknowledging what we'd experienced would somehow make it more real. Morning brought harsh, fluorescent light and the comforting banality of continental breakfast. With caffeine and distance came the inevitable rationalizations. Sleep deprivation, group hysteria, maybe even hallucinogenic spores from forest fungi. There had to be a logical explanation. I checked out of the motel and drove to the nearest public library. The librarian, a Navajo woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, looked up when I approached the reference desk. "I need information about local folklore," I said, "specifically about figures that guard sacred sites in the forest, ones that might be depicted with animal skulls." Her expression changed subtly. "School project?" "Personal interest," I replied. "I was hiking in Navajo National Forest and saw some petroglyphs. I'm curious about their meaning." She studied me for a long moment. "Which trail were you on?" "The northern loop, but I cut across to the eastern trail when I got a bit lost." She nodded slowly. "Wait here." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a slim volume, not from the public shelves. This was written by a tribal elder about 30 years ago, not published commercially, just for preservation of stories. The book was titled Guardians of the Sacred, Navajo Protective Spirits. I thanked her and found a quiet corner to read. The contents were fascinating. Detailed accounts of spirits believed to protect ceremonial grounds, burial sites, and places of power. Some were benevolent, others dangerous to trespassers. One chapter focused specifically on what the author called boundary walkers, entities that patrolled the edges between safe and forbidden territories. They were described as shapeshifters who could appear human from a distance, but revealed their true nature upon closer inspection. Often they would wear the skins or skulls of animals as both disguise and symbolic connection to the natural world. The descriptions matched what we'd seen with uncomfortable precision. More disturbing were the accounts of their behavior. They were said to stalk intruders, taking their food, leaving dead animals as warnings, and creating illusions that caused travelers to become lost or disoriented. If these warnings were ignored, the consequences became increasingly severe. However, the text also noted something surprising. Boundary walkers were not inherently malevolent. Their purpose was protection, not harm. In several accounts, they had actually guided lost travelers back to safety after first warning them away from sacred areas. I photographed several pages with my phone, then returned the book to the librarian. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked. "I think so. Do you know if there are any documented sacred sites near the Northern Trail system?" She hesitated before answering. "Nothing on official Forest Service maps, But there's a canyon system locals avoid. Old burial caves were discovered there in the 1950s during a survey for a now-abandoned dam project. With petroglyphs showing figures with animal skulls, her eyes narrowed slightly. You saw it? It wasn't a question. I nodded. And did you see anything else while you were there? I considered lying, but something in her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Yes, something followed us, led us back to the trailhead eventually. She sighed deeply. You're lucky. Some who disrespect those boundaries never find their way back. I didn't know, I said defensively. There were no signs, no warnings. There are warnings for those who know how to read them, she replied. The Forest Service removes the more explicit markers. They think they're deterring vandals and looters. Instead, they're removing protection for both the sites and the hikers. She wrote something on a slip of paper. If you're still having experiences, since your return, call this number. It's a medicine man who helps with such things. I took the paper, not sure whether to feel reassured or more disturbed that she thought I might need spiritual intervention. Thank you, but everything stopped once I left the forest. She nodded, but her expression remained concerned. The Guardians usually stay within their territories, usually. I drove back to my apartment that afternoon, the 6-hour journey passing in a blur of podcast distractions and gas station coffee. By the time I arrived home, rational thought had reasserted itself. The experience had been frightening but explainable. A territorial predator, perhaps a mountain lion as the ranger suggested, combined with exhaustion and the power of suggestion. The apartment felt normal, safe. I showered away 3 days of forest grime, ordered takeout, and settled on the couch with mindless television. No deer skull figures lurking in corners, no strange sounds, just ordinary, comforting domesticity. Around midnight, I finally felt tired enough to sleep. As I was closing the blinds, something caught my eye in the parking lot below. A tall, thin figure standing beneath a streetlight. Just a person waiting for someone, I told myself. But they stood too still, and when I looked directly at them, they tilted their head at that impossible angle. I jerked the blind shut and backed away. Coincidence? Had to be. Just an ordinary person who happened to move strangely. The guardian spirits stayed in their territories. The librarian had said so herself. Sleep came eventually, but brought no relief. In my dreams, I wandered endlessly through forest paths that doubled back on themselves. Behind every tree lurked watching eyes. Ahead, petroglyphs shifted and moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. I woke to the sound of something scratching at my window. Just tree branches moved by wind, I realized, as rational thought returned. But when I checked my phone, I found dozens of photos I didn't remember taking. All completely black, except for a pair of glowing points that might have been eyes reflected in darkness. Over the next week, small disturbances accumulated. Items moved when I wasn't looking. Strange tracks appeared in the dust on my balcony. Not human, not animal, something in between. At night, that whistling, laughing sound sometimes drifted through my apartment's thin walls, though my neighbors claimed not to hear anything when I asked. I found myself returning to the librarian's book, now saved as images on my phone. One passage in particular haunted me. Those who have encountered the guardians may find themselves marked. The spirits recognize them, remember them. Distance provides no sanctuary if proper respects were not paid. What constituted proper respects? The book mentioned offerings, prayers in Navajo, ritualized acknowledgments of trespass, none of which I had performed. After 2 weeks of escalating phenomena, dead birds on my doorstep, strange figures glimpsed in my periphery, my key found hanging from a thread inside my locked apartment, I finally retrieved the medicine man's number. He agreed to see me the next day. I drove back to the reservation, following his directions to a small house set against red sandstone cliffs. The medicine man, introducing himself simply as Ben, was younger than I expected, perhaps in his 40s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt rather than anything ceremonial. He listened without interruption as I described everything that had happened. from the first night in the forest to the ongoing disturbances. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "You crossed a boundary," he said simply. "Now you must acknowledge it and make amends." "How?" I asked. "We return to the place. You present an offering. You speak words of respect and regret. If the guardian accepts, the connection will be broken. And if it doesn't accept?" He met my eyes steadily. "Then the marking remains. But typically the guardians seek only acknowledgement, not revenge." The next morning, we drove together to the trailhead. Ben brought supplies for the offering: corn pollen, cedar, sage, and a small clay vessel. We hiked in silence, following the same path I'd taken 3 weeks earlier. When we reached the rock face with the petroglyphs, Ben stopped. "This is the place, the boundary." He instructed me in preparing the offering: a small mound of corn pollen mixed with herbs, placed before the largest petroglyph. He taught me simple Navajo phrases, asking forgiveness for trespass and acknowledging the guardian's right to protect its domain. As I spoke the words, a wind rose suddenly, swirling around us. The offering scattered, carried upward in a spiral that mimicked the petroglyphs themselves. For just a moment, I thought I saw that familiar silhouette at the edge of the clearing, the skull-headed figure watching impassively. Then it was gone. The wind died. The forest sounds returned: birds calling, insects humming, leaves rustling normally. "It's done," Ben said quietly. "The guardian has accepted." We hiked back in companionable silence. At the trailhead, he declined my offer of payment, asking instead that I respect the boundaries I encountered in the future. All boundaries, not just those in the forest. That night, back in my apartment, the disturbances stopped. No scratching, no moved objects, no strange sounds. Just ordinary, blessed quiet. But sometimes, when I'm hiking other remote trails, I find myself scanning the tree line more carefully. And if I come across unfamiliar symbols or arrangements that seem too deliberate to be natural, I turn back. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some watchers should remain undisturbed. The forests hold older truths than our maps acknowledge. I learned that lesson in the hardest possible way, and count myself fortunate to have emerged marked but unharmed, reminded rather than removed. Some say there's no such thing as skinwalkers or boundary guardians, just folklore to explain natural phenomena or human threats. They're entitled to that belief. I once shared it. But I know what I saw in those empty eye sockets. I know what followed me home, and I know with absolute certainty that something still watches from the boundaries, not just in remote forests, but at the edges of what we understand about the world. 3 months passed. Summer turned to fall. The incident in the forest became something I discussed less frequently, a story that grew more implausible with each telling. Friends listened politely, attributing my experience to exhaustion or an overactive imagination. I almost began to believe them, because sometimes, when I reviewed the photos from that trip, I'd catch details I hadn't noticed before. A blur of movement between trees, the suggestion of a figure watching from shadows, patterns in scattered leaves that shouldn't have formed naturally. My nightmares had subsided after the offering ceremony with Ben, but occasionally still jolted me awake. Visions of empty eye sockets watching, judging, waiting. On those nights, I'd check my apartment meticulously, half expecting to find objects moved or strange tracks in dust. But nothing ever appeared. The boundary had been re-established. In October, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was simply, "Northern Loop Incident." The contents were brief. "Similar experience happened to me last week. Need to talk. Please contact." A phone number followed. I hesitated before calling, suspecting a prank or scam, but curiosity won out. The voice that answered was female, tense. "This is Madison. You sent me an email about the Northern Loop?" "Yes, thank you for calling. I found your name in a forum post about unusual encounters in Navajo National Forest. You mentioned a figure with an animal skull?" My pulse quickened. "How did you find that post? I never used my real name." I'm a journalist, she explained. I've been researching disappearances in national parks and forests. Your account matched patterns I've been tracking. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from a woman in her early 30s, with quick eyes and a recorder on the table between us. Mind if I record? She asked, just for my notes. I hesitated, then nodded. She pressed a button, and the red light illuminated. Let's start with your experience, she said. The complete version, not the sanitized one you posted online. I recounted everything, the strange sounds, the figure by the petroglyphs, the way it had eventually led us back to safety. As I spoke, Madison occasionally nodded, making notes on her laptop. Now tell me about the aftermath, she prompted when I finished. The disturbances at your home? I described those as well, the moved objects, the scratching sounds, the tracks in dust, how they'd stopped after the offering ceremony with Ben. She sat back when I finished. Your experience matches 7 others I've documented in the past 2 years, all in areas with known or suspected Native American sacred sites, all involving figures described as unnaturally tall with animal skulls or features, all resulting in similar afterward effects until some form of acknowledgement was made. So you believe me, I said, relief evident in my voice. I believe something happened, she said carefully. Whether it's supernatural or has a rational explanation, I'm still determining, but the pattern is undeniable. She turned her laptop toward me, showing a map of the southwestern United States marked with red dots. Each of these represents an encounter similar to yours. Notice anything? The dots formed a rough circle around a central area spanning parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. They're all at the perimeter of something, I said slowly. Exactly. Traditional lands considered sacred by multiple tribes, places where development has been fought for decades, and where disappearances occur at statistically significant rates. She clicked to another screen. News articles about hikers gone missing, search parties finding no trace, authorities eventually classifying cases as misadventure or exposure. Most people who encounter these phenomena never report it officially, she continued. Who would believe them? But some share their experiences in forums, support groups, with trusted friends. I've been piecing these accounts together for a documentary. And you had an encounter yourself? I asked. Her expression tightened. Last week, solo hiking trip researching locations. I found petroglyphs similar to what you described. That night something circled my tent, left a dead rabbit, followed me for 2 days. I eventually made it out, but she hesitated. Things have been happening at my apartment since. You need to make an offering, I said immediately. I can put you in touch with Ben. She shook her head. Already did something similar. A Ute elder performed a cleansing. It didn't work. The disturbances are getting worse. Ice formed in my stomach. What do you mean, worse? Physical manifestations, actual sightings inside my home. Objects not just moved, but destroyed. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos, then showed me one. Her living room wall covered in those same spiral petroglyph patterns, apparently scratched directly into the drywall. Jesus, I whispered. The elder said my case is different because I went looking for it. I wasn't an accidental trespasser like you. I deliberately sought out these phenomena for my documentary, crossed the boundary with purpose rather than ignorance. We sat in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. Finally, I asked, "What are you going to do?" "That's partly why I wanted to meet," she admitted. "I'm going back, to make a more significant offering. The elder believes I need to return to the exact spot and perform a specific ceremony. He's agreed to accompany me." "When?" "This weekend, and—" She met my eyes directly. "I was hoping you might come too. Your experience ended positively. The guardian accepted your offering. Having you there might help." Every instinct told me to refuse. I'd escaped whatever this was, made peace with the boundary guardians. Why risk attracting their attention again? But Madison's situation echoed my own experience too closely to ignore. If our roles had been reversed, I would have been desperate for help from someone who'd successfully resolved the haunting. "I'll come," I said finally. "But I want to speak with the elder first. Understand exactly what we're doing." She nodded, visible relief crossing her features. "Thank you. We leave Friday morning." 3 days later, I found myself back in the forest I'd sworn never to enter again, hiking alongside Madison and a Ute elder named Joseph. He was older than Ben, perhaps in his 70s, with deep lines etched into his face and eyes that missed nothing. The hike to Madison's encounter site took most of the day. Unlike my experience, her boundary crossing had occurred in a different section of the forest, a remote canyon system rarely visited by hikers. As we descended into the canyon, I felt that familiar prickling sensation of being watched. "They know we're here," Joseph said quietly, confirming my suspicion. "They remember both of you." We made camp near the petroglyph site Madison had discovered, a rock overhang covered in ancient images similar to those I'd seen. Joseph spent the evening preparing for the ceremony, arranging various herbs, cornmeal, and items I couldn't identify. "The offering must be more significant because the trespass was deliberate," he explained as darkness fell. "Not just acknowledgement, but exchange. Something of value must be given." "What kind of exchange?" Madison asked nervously. Joseph's expression was grave. "Traditionally blood, just a small amount. But symbology matters more than quantity. It represents commitment." We slept uneasily that night, taking turns keeping watch. Strange sounds echoed through the canyon. Not quite the whistle laugh I remembered, but similar enough to raise the hairs on my neck. Shapes moved at the periphery of our campfire light. Once, I distinctly saw a tall figure watching from atop the canyon rim, silhouetted against the stars. Morning brought heavy fog that shrouded the canyon in ghostly white. Joseph directed us to the petroglyph wall, where he began arranging the ceremonial items in patterns that matched the ancient images. He instructed Madison in the words she would need to speak, phrases in Ute and Navajo that acknowledged the guardian's domain, and her transgression in seeking them out. "And the blood?" she asked, voice steady despite her evident fear. Joseph handed her a small stone knife. "Just a drop from your palm, placed on the offering." The ceremony began with Joseph burning sage and cedar, the smoke curling upward into the fog. Madison spoke the phrases he had taught her, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. I stood slightly apart, witness rather than participant. As the ritual progressed, the fog thickened impossibly until Joseph and Madison were barely visible just feet away from me. The temperature dropped. That sensation of being watched intensified until it felt like physical pressure against my skin. Madison completed her recitation and pressed the stone knife against her palm. A single drop of blood fell onto the cornmeal offering. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fog began to move, not dispersing but coalescing, forming a vaguely humanoid shape taller than any of us. Through the swirling whiteness, I glimpsed the now familiar outline of antlers, the suggestion of that skull-like face. Joseph and Madison saw it too. The elder bowed his head respectfully. Madison stood her ground, though I could see her trembling slightly. A sound emerged from the fog figure, not the whistle laugh, but a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my chest. It continued for perhaps 30 seconds, modulating in ways that suggested language, though none I could comprehend. Joseph responded in what sounded like very old Navajo or Ute. The fog figure rippled, then extended what might have been an arm toward Madison. She instinctively stepped back. "It wants something else," Joseph said urgently. "Your recording device, your research." Madison's hand went protectively to her jacket pocket, where I knew she kept her recorder and small notebook. "All of it?" Joseph nodded. "That is the exchange. Your blood acknowledges the trespass. Your work is the price of forgiveness." She hesitated only briefly before removing both items and placing them on the cornmeal beside her blood. The fog figure lowered its arm. The vibrating sound returned, briefer this time. "It accepts," Joseph translated. "The boundary is restored." The fog began to disperse, not gradually, but in an instant, as if swept away by an unfelt wind. Sunlight broke through, illuminating the canyon in normal morning light. Where the fog figure had stood, we found only undisturbed ground, but the recorder and notebook were gone. "It's done," Joseph said, gathering his remaining ceremonial items. "The disturbances will stop now." Madison looked both relieved and bereaved. 6 months of research, she said quietly. Interviews, evidence, documentation. "A small price," Joseph replied, not unkindly. Others who sought these guardians with purpose paid with more than recordings. We hiked out in contemplative silence, each processing what we'd witnessed. At the trailhead, Madison thanked me for coming. "I couldn't have faced that alone," she admitted. "What will you do about your documentary?" I asked. She smiled ruefully. "Start over. Focus on other aspects of wilderness disappearances. Leave the guardians to their territories." She hesitated, then added, "But I'll always know what's really out there. What watches from the boundaries, same as you." We parted ways, returning to our separate cities and ordinary lives. In the months since, I've had no further encounters with the phenomena. The nightmares have stopped completely. The boundary, as Joseph promised, was restored. But I've changed my relationship with wilderness. I research areas thoroughly before hiking, looking for signs of cultural significance. I leave offerings of cornmeal at trailheads, small acknowledgments that I understand I am a visitor, not an owner. I pay attention to warnings, both official and subtle. Most importantly, I've come to respect that not all territories are meant for human exploration. Some boundaries exist for reasons older than our understanding. Some watchers have guarded their domains since time immemorial, and will continue long after we're gone. If you venture into remote wilderness, remember this: you are never truly alone in the forest. Eyes follow your passage. Ancient intelligences assess your intentions. Guardians stand at the boundaries between known and sacred spaces. Tread carefully, listen closely. And if you feel that prickling sensation of being watched, or hear a sound like whistling that becomes laughter, turn back. Return to marked trails and known territories. Some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. The summer of 2020 was meant to be unremarkable. I had just finished my sophomore year at Westridge High, and like many summers before, I was headed to Camp Pinewood near the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. At 16, I was reaching that age where summer camp could either be the highlight of your year or an obligation you tolerated for your parents' sake. For me, it had always been the former, until that summer. Camp Pinewood was a modest operation run by First Community Church of Raleigh. Nothing fancy. Wooden cabins arranged in a horseshoe around a central fire pit, a mess hall that doubled as an assembly area, and a small lake for swimming and canoeing. The surrounding pine forest stretched for miles, dense enough that you couldn't see the road once you were 100 yards into the camp. My parents dropped me off that Sunday afternoon, the humid June air clinging to my skin as I waved goodbye. Dad helped me carry my duffel bag to Cabin 6, where I'd be staying with 7 other boys and our counselor, Ricky. At 22, Ricky was young enough to relate to us, but old enough to command some respect. He had been coming to Camp Pinewood since he was a kid himself. "Another year, another adventure," he said, helping me claim a bottom bunk. "You've been coming here a while, right, Jake?" 5 years now, I replied, unpacking my clothes into the small wooden drawer beneath my bunk. The other boys filtered in throughout the afternoon. There was Wesley, my bunkmate from last year. Benjamin, a quiet kid with thick glasses who kept to himself. Tyler and Zach, who were practically inseparable. Owen, a lanky basketball player from Charlotte. And Noah and Graham, first-timers who looked around with the wide-eyed enthusiasm I remembered feeling my first year. That first evening passed with the usual camp rituals. The welcome bonfire, singing traditional camp songs, introductions, and s'mores. Camp Director Harriet went over the rules. No leaving cabins after lights out, no swimming without supervision, stay on marked trails, and always use the buddy system. The forest may look inviting, she said, her voice carrying over the crackling fire, but it's easy to get lost. There are steep ravines, thorny bushes, and the occasional black bear or coyote. Nothing to be afraid of if you follow the rules. I remember watching the shadows dance across her face as she spoke, unaware that her routine warning would take on new meaning in the days ahead. As we settled into our bunks that night, the familiar sounds of the woods enveloped us. Crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. It felt like coming home. I drifted off to sleep with a sense of contentment, blissfully unaware of what awaited me in those woods. Monday and Tuesday passed in a blur of activities: swimming, hiking, archery, crafts, and the usual team-building exercises designed to forge friendships. The weather cooperated with clear skies and temperatures in the high 80s, the kind of summer days that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was Tuesday night when I first noticed something odd. After dinner, we had gathered for evening devotionals in the mess hall. As Pastor Drew spoke about finding strength in adversity, my attention drifted to the windows. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grounds. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the forest. At first, I thought it was a deer. They were common enough in these parts, but something about the movement seemed deliberate, calculated. Not the cautious step of a woodland creature, but the purposeful motion of something watching. I squinted, trying to make out details through the deepening twilight, but whatever it was had disappeared among the trees. "Jake, everything okay?" Wesley nudged me, bringing me back to the present. "Yeah, just thought I saw something in the woods," I whispered. "Probably a deer," he said, echoing my initial thought. I nodded, but a strange unease had settled in my stomach. That night I had trouble falling asleep. The cabin was stuffy despite the open windows, and every sound from the forest seemed amplified. The wind through the pine needles created an eerie whistle that reminded me of distant crying. The branches scratching against the roof sounded like fingernails desperate to get in. Around midnight I heard it, a strange guttural sound unlike anything I'd heard before. Not quite a growl, not quite a hiss, something in between that raised the hair on my arms. I sat up in bed, straining to hear, but it didn't repeat. Glancing around the cabin, I saw that everyone else was asleep, undisturbed. I lay back down, telling myself it was just an unfamiliar animal, perhaps a fox or raccoon. The rational explanation didn't stop my imagination from conjuring less innocent possibilities as I finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Wednesday brought rain, the heavy, persistent kind that confined us to indoor activities. The mood in camp dampened with the weather, restlessness setting in as we played board games and worked on crafts instead of exploring the outdoors. During a break between activities, I found myself staring out the mess hall windows at the rain-soaked forest. The trees seemed darker, more forbidding in the gray downpour. Again, I caught a glimpse of movement. This time, what looked like a figure moving between the pines, hunched and swift. "Did you see that?" I asked Benjamin, who was sitting nearby. He adjusted his glasses and peered into the downpour. "See what?" "I thought I saw someone in the woods." "Probably one of the counselors checking the grounds," he suggested, returning to his book. But I wasn't convinced. The figure had moved with an odd, loping gait that didn't seem quite right. That night, the rain continued, drumming against our cabin roof and creating a constant background noise that made it hard to hear anything else. I lay awake long after lights out, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. The strange sound I'd heard the previous night didn't return, but my unease grew nonetheless. Around 2 a.m., I had to use the bathroom. Our cabin had a small attached facility, just a toilet and sink, but it required crossing the dark common area. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Wesley above me, and padded across the wooden floor. As I passed by the window, a flash of lightning illuminated the clearing outside our cabin. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees watching our cabin. The silhouette was tall, unnaturally so, and seemed to be hunched forward. I froze, heart hammering in my chest, waiting for another lightning flash to confirm what I'd seen. When it came, the space was empty. I hurried to the bathroom, did my business as quickly as possible, and rushed back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin despite the warm night. I told myself it was a trick of the light, my imagination fueled by the ghost stories that inevitably circulated at camp. But deep down, I knew I'd seen something that had no business being in those woods at night. The next morning, dark circles under my eyes betrayed my restless night. At breakfast, I noticed similar exhaustion on several other faces. "Did you guys sleep okay?" I asked, poking at my scrambled eggs. "I kept hearing weird noises," Zach admitted. "Like something was walking around the cabin." "Probably raccoons," Ricky interjected from the end of the table. "They get bolder when it rains, looking for shelter or food." His explanation made sense but didn't fully dispel my concerns. Raccoons didn't stand 6 feet tall at the edge of the forest. Thursday night marked a turning point. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the forest damp and fragrant with pine and wet earth. We'd spent the day hiking muddy trails and playing capture the flag, making up for lost time outdoors. Exhaustion should have guaranteed deep sleep, but as darkness settled over Camp Pinewood, that strange restlessness returned to me. I heard it again around 11 p.m., that unidentifiable sound, closer now. It seemed to come from just outside our cabin window, a wet, rasping noise that could have been breathing or some animal call I'd never encountered. This time, I wasn't the only one who noticed. "What is that?" Wesley whispered from the bunk above me. "I don't know," I replied, equally quiet. "I heard it Tuesday night, too." We listened together as the sound faded, then stopped completely. The cabin was silent except for Noah's soft snoring from across the room. "Should we tell Ricky?" Wesley asked. I considered it, but what would we say? That we heard a strange noise outside? It didn't seem worth waking our counselor. "Let's see if it comes back," I suggested. "Probably just an animal." Wesley agreed, and we both attempted to go back to sleep. But curiosity nagged at me, making real rest impossible. After an hour of tossing and turning, I made a decision that I would come to regret. I needed to see what was making that sound. With painstaking care, I slipped out of bed and pulled on my shoes. The flashlight from my backpack would be too bright, possibly waking the others, so I opted to use the dim light from my watch instead. Moving silently, I crept to the cabin door, wincing at every creak of the old wooden floorboards. Outside, the night was clear and cool after the rain. A half-moon cast enough light to navigate by, transforming the familiar campground into an alien landscape of silver and shadow. The smell of wet pine was overwhelming, mixing with the lingering scent of that evening's campfire. I stood on the cabin steps, suddenly aware of how foolish this venture was. The camp rules explicitly forbade leaving cabins after dark, and for good reason. But now that I was outside, my curiosity pushed me forward. The silence was absolute. No cricket chirps, no owl hoots, just the occasional drip of water from saturated branches. The absence of natural noise struck me as profoundly wrong, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I moved cautiously toward the tree line where I'd seen the figure during the lightning storm. The wet ground squelched beneath my sneakers, each step sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. As I approached the first line of pines, that prickling sensation of being watched intensified. "Hello?" I called softly, immediately regretting breaking the silence. No response came, but as my eyes adjusted further to the darkness, I noticed a disturbance in the underbrush about 20 yards into the woods, broken branches and what looked like large impressions in the mud. Something had moved through here recently, something heavy. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of the markings, when a twig snapped deeper in the forest. My head jerked up, peering into the darkness. That's when I saw it. Between two massive pine trunks stood a figure that defied explanation. In the moonlight, I could make out a tall, lean shape, at least 6.5 feet, standing upright but with an unnatural hunch to its shoulders. What struck me most wasn't its height, but its outline. Instead of the smooth silhouette of human clothing, its form seemed rough, textured, almost scaled in appearance. Its head was elongated, and as it shifted position, I caught a glimpse of eyes reflecting the moonlight with an intense, reddish gleam. My heart nearly stopped. I stood paralyzed as my mind scrambled to categorize what I was seeing. A man in some kind of suit, a hunter with specialized gear. But no explanation felt right. Then it moved. Not the cautious movement of a human in the woods, but a fluid, almost reptilian motion as it stepped forward. A low hiss emerged from its direction, the same sound I'd been hearing outside our cabin. Terror finally broke my paralysis. I stumbled backward, nearly falling as my heel caught on a root. The movement seemed to trigger something in the creature, and it surged forward with horrifying speed, that hiss rising to a rasping screech. I ran. Faster than I'd ever moved in my life, I sprinted back toward cabin 6, my lungs burning and legs pumping desperately. I could hear it behind me, branches breaking, that terrible sound growing louder. I didn't look back, focused only on the cabin door that seemed impossibly far away. When I reached the steps, I practically threw myself against the door, fumbling with the handle before bursting inside. My entrance was far from quiet. I tumbled into the common area with a crash that startled everyone awake. Lights flicked on as Ricky jumped from his bed looking disheveled and alarmed. "What the hell?" he demanded, taking in my mud-covered clothes and terrified expression. The words tumbled out of me in a panicked rush, the sounds, the figure in the woods, how it had chased me. The other boys gathered around, wide-eyed, as I described what I'd seen. "It was like a man, but not a man," I gasped, still struggling to catch my breath. "It moved wrong, and its skin, it wasn't skin at all." Ricky's expression shifted from concern to skepticism as my story unfolded. "Jake, calm down," he said firmly. "You know you're not supposed to leave the cabin at night." "I know, but no buts. You probably saw a deer or a bear. They can look pretty scary in the dark, especially when you're already spooked." He moved to the window, shining his heavy-duty flashlight out into the darkness. The powerful beam swept across the clearing, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. "See? Nothing there," he said, turning back to me. "Look, I get that the noises freaked you out, but there's a rational explanation. Could have been anything. A coyote, a raccoon, even a bobcat." None of those explanations matched what I'd seen, but Ricky's mind was made up. He instructed everyone to go back to bed, promising to report the incident to Pastor Drew in the morning and check the perimeter of the camp. As we settled back into our bunks, the other boys peppered me with whispered questions. What exactly had I seen? Was I sure it wasn't just a person? Did it really chase me? I answered as best I could, but the terror of the encounter had left me shaken, my memories already clouding with doubt. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? Could it have been a confused hiker or a park ranger in unusual gear? But deep down, I knew. Whatever had watched me from those trees wasn't human. The next morning, I awoke exhausted after barely sleeping. The events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike in the bright sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. But the mud on my shoes and the scratches on my arms from branches confirmed the reality of my midnight excursion. At breakfast, Pastor Drew pulled me aside. Ricky had informed him of the incident, and his expression was a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Jake, Ricky tells me you were outside after curfew last night," he began, his voice low enough that the other campers couldn't hear. "Yes, sir," I admitted. "I heard strange noises and wanted to investigate." "And you think you saw something in the woods?" I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "Yes, it was tall, with reddish eyes. It moved wrong, not like a person or an animal I've ever seen." Pastor Drew's frown deepened. "Jake, these woods can play tricks on your mind, especially at night. Your imagination, combined with shadows and unfamiliar wildlife, can create some pretty frightening images." "But it chased me," I insisted. "I heard it behind me." He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "I understand you believe what you saw was real. I'm not saying you're lying. but I've been coming to these woods for 30 years, and I've never encountered anything that couldn't be explained by natural causes." His disbelief stung, but it wasn't unexpected. What would I have thought if someone else had told me such a story? "As punishment for breaking curfew," Pastor Drew continued, "you'll be helping Harold in the kitchen after dinner tonight. And no more nighttime adventures, understood? Next time, wake your counselor if you hear something concerning." I nodded, accepting the punishment without argument. It seemed pointless to press the issue further. Throughout the day, word of my experience spread through the camp like wildfire. Some campers were fascinated, begging for details, while others openly mocked me. Wesley, to his credit, stood by my side. "I heard the noises too," he told anyone who would listen. "Something weird was definitely out there." But without having seen the creature himself, his support only went so far. By afternoon, the story had evolved into camp legend status, with younger campers adding their own embellishments. I overheard one claiming the lizard man had glowing eyes and claws the size of kitchen knives. During free time, I found myself drawn to the edge of the forest again, this time in broad daylight and with several curious followers. The mud where I'd seen the impressions had dried, making it difficult to discern any clear tracks. But I did find broken branches and disturbed underbrush that confirmed something had moved through the area. "Maybe it was one of those Bigfoot creatures," offered Graham, who had appointed himself my chief supporter. "My uncle swears he saw one in Tennessee once." "It wasn't Bigfoot," I said firmly. "It moved differently, more like, I don't know, a lizard standing upright." This description earned me more skeptical looks, and I regretted saying it aloud. Even to my own ears it sounded ridiculous. That evening, while scrubbing pots in the kitchen as part of my punishment, I found an unexpected ally in Harold, the camp cook. A man in his 60s with weathered skin and perpetually flour-dusted hands, he'd been working at Camp Pinewood longer than anyone else. "Heard about your adventure last night," he said casually as I scoured a particularly stubborn pot. "Saw something strange in the woods, did you?" His tone lacked the condescension I'd heard from others, prompting me to look up. "You believe me?" Harold shrugged, continuing to wipe down the industrial-sized stove. "Didn't say that, but these mountains got plenty of stories. Been working here 32 summers, and I've heard some things that would make your hair stand on end." I set down my scouring pad. "Like what?" "Well," he said, lowering his voice, "about 15 years back, we had a counselor go missing for 2 days. James was his name. Smart fellow, knew these woods like the back of his hand. When we found him, he was dehydrated, covered in scratches, and not making much sense." "What happened to him?" "He claimed something had been stalking him through the forest. Said it looked like a man, but moved all wrong. Called it the Watcher in the Pines. The official story was heat exhaustion and disorientation, but James never came back to Camp Pinewood after that summer." A chill ran down my back despite the kitchen's warmth. "Did he describe what it looked like?" Harold hesitated. "Said it had eyes that caught the light like an animal's. Said its skin looked wrong, rough like bark or scales. Sound familiar?" I nodded slowly, my throat suddenly dry. "There's been talk for decades about strange sightings in these parts," Harold continued. "Most folks call it the Carolina Lizard Man, though that name started down in Lee County. Others just say it's mountain folk tales. Either way, if I were you, I'd stick close to the cabins after dark." His words confirmed my worst fears, while simultaneously providing a strange comfort. At least someone didn't think I was completely crazy. Despite Harold's warning and my own terrifying experience, I couldn't let the matter rest. The creature, whatever it was, had been outside our cabin multiple nights. What if it came back? What if next time it tried to get inside? These thoughts consumed me as Saturday approached, marking 1 week at camp with another still to go. I spent free periods in the small camp library, searching for information about local legends. Most books focused on Cherokee myths or standard Appalachian folklore, but one slim volume caught my attention. Mountain Mysteries, Unexplained Phenomena of the Carolinas. A whole chapter was dedicated to the lizard man of Lee County, describing a bipedal reptilian creature first reported in 1988 near Bishopville, South Carolina. According to the accounts, the creature was 7 feet tall with scaly skin, red eyes, and 3-fingered hands. It had allegedly damaged a car and terrified a local teenager. While the location was wrong, Lee County was hours from our camp. The description matched what I'd seen with uncanny accuracy. Further reading revealed similar sightings throughout both Carolinas over the decades, often near water sources, and typically at night. I shared my findings with Wesley and Benjamin, who had become increasingly interested in my experience. Benjamin, ever the skeptic, suggested more mundane explanations. It could be someone in a costume, he offered, maybe a local trying to scare campers. At night, in the middle of the woods, Wesley countered. Besides, Jake said it moved weird, not like a person. People can move strangely too, Benjamin insisted, especially if they're trying to appear inhuman. Their debate continued, while I considered both possibilities. A hoax seemed more plausible than a reptilian humanoid, but neither explanation fully satisfied me. If it was someone in costume, they were taking extraordinary risks, navigating difficult terrain at night, just to frighten campers. If it was a previously undiscovered creature, well, that opened up questions I wasn't prepared to answer. That night, we formulated a plan. It wasn't sophisticated. We would take turns watching from the window after lights out, documenting any strange sights or sounds. If we saw or heard something unusual, we'd wake Ricky rather than investigating ourselves. Benjamin borrowed a digital camera from the camp photography instructor, claiming he wanted to practice night photography. The small device had a decent zoom and night vision capabilities that might capture evidence if our visitor returned. Our surveillance began at lights out, with Wesley taking the first 2-hour shift. I tried to sleep, but found myself staring at the cabin ceiling, every creak and groan of the old structure setting my nerves on edge. Wesley's watch proved uneventful, and he woke me at midnight for my turn. I took up position by the window, camera in hand, scanning the moonlit clearing for any sign of movement. The forest beyond was a wall of impenetrable darkness, the gaps between trees like doorways to another world. For an hour nothing happened. My eyelids grew heavy, the monotony of watching an unchanging scene lulling me toward sleep. Then, just as I was considering waking Benjamin early for his shift, I heard it. That distinctive hissing breath, closer than ever before. My hands trembled as I raised the camera, peering through the viewfinder at the tree line. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the forest. It moved with that same fluid, unnatural gait, emerging partially into the clearing before stopping. Even at this distance, I could make out its silhouette, tall, lean, with that distinctive hunched posture. The moonlight revealed little detail, but there was no mistaking the reddish gleam of its eyes as it surveyed our cabin. I pressed the camera's capture button repeatedly, hoping at least one image would turn out clearly. The sound of the shutter seemed impossibly loud in the quiet cabin. The creature's head snapped toward our window, those eyes fixing directly on my position. A wave of primal terror washed over me, the feeling of being prey, spotted by a predator. For several agonizing seconds, we stared at each other across the distance, neither moving. Then it took a step forward into the clearing. I dropped the camera and scrambled backward from the window, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. My movement disturbed Benjamin, who sat up groggily. "What's happening?" he mumbled. "It's out there," I whispered urgently. "The thing. It's in the clearing." Benjamin reached for his glasses, but before he could respond further, a sharp scratching sound came from the cabin wall, directly beneath our window. The noise moved slowly along the exterior, like claws dragging across wood. "Wake Ricky," I hissed, retrieving the fallen camera with shaking hands. Benjamin didn't need to be told twice. He hurried to the counselor's partitioned area, rousing him with urgent whispers. By the time they returned, The scratching had circled halfway around the cabin, now at the back wall. "What's going on?" Ricky demanded, looking more irritated than concerned. "The thing Jake saw, it's outside," Benjamin explained, his skepticism apparently forgotten in the face of the unsettling sounds. "We heard it scratching on the walls." Ricky's expression hardened. "This isn't funny, guys." "We're not joking," I insisted, holding up the camera. "I got pictures." As if responding to my claim, the scratching suddenly stopped. The ensuing silence felt heavy, oppressive. Ricky grabbed his flashlight and moved to the door. "Fine, let's go look." "Wait," I protested. "It's dangerous." But he was already stepping outside, his powerful flashlight cutting through the darkness. Benjamin and I exchanged nervous glances before following, careful to stay close behind him. The beam swept across the clearing, revealing nothing but empty space and silent trees. Ricky moved methodically around the cabin, examining the wooden exterior. "There," Benjamin said suddenly, pointing to the wall beneath our window. In the flashlight beam, we could see fresh marks in the wood, 3 parallel grooves, deep enough to have splintered the surface. They continued around the corner, following the pattern of scratching we'd heard inside. Ricky ran his fingers over the marks, his skepticism visibly wavering. "Could be raccoons," he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Raccoons don't make claw marks 5 feet off the ground," I pointed out, "and they don't have claws that big." The counselor straightened up, his expression troubled. "Let's get back inside. I'll report this to Pastor Drew in the morning." Once back in the cabin, I showed him the photos I'd taken. Most were blurry or showed nothing but darkness, but one captured the silhouette clearly enough. A tall figure at the edge of the trees, those distinctive reflective eyes visible as bright points in the night. Ricky studied the image for a long time, his previous dismissiveness gone. "I don't know what this is," he admitted finally, "but whatever it is, we're not taking any chances. Nobody leaves this cabin tonight." None of us argued with that instruction. Sunday morning brought panic to Camp Pinewood. The claw marks weren't limited to our cabin. Overnight, 4 other cabins had been similarly marked, and the mess hall door showed signs of something trying to force entry. Deep tracks in the mud suggested whatever had visited us had circled the entire campground. Pastor Drew called an emergency meeting after breakfast, his typically calm demeanor replaced by obvious concern. "Last night, several buildings were vandalized," he announced to the assembled campers and staff. "As a precaution, we're implementing additional safety measures. No one is to be outside alone day or night. Evening activities will conclude earlier, and security patrols will monitor the grounds overnight." He didn't mention my sighting or the nature of the vandalism, but rumors spread quickly. Some blamed local teenagers, others suggested a bear or mountain lion, but I noticed the staff exchanging worried glances that suggested they knew more than they were saying. After the meeting, I approached Pastor Drew with my camera, showing him the clearest image I'd captured. "This is what I saw," I told him. "The same thing that made those marks." He studied the photo, his frown deepening. "I've called the Forest Service," he said finally. "They're sending rangers to investigate. Until then, we're treating this as a potential wildlife incursion." "That's not wildlife," I insisted. "At least not any kind I've ever heard of." Pastor Drew sighed, handing the camera back. "Jake, I appreciate your concern, but causing a panic won't help anyone. Whatever this is, the proper authorities will handle it." I wanted to argue further, but recognized the futility. Instead, I joined Wesley and Benjamin in comparing notes about the previous night. Both had been thoroughly converted from skepticism to belief, after seeing the claw marks and hearing the creature's movements. "My dad hunts," Wesley said quietly as we sat at a picnic table, well within the camp central area as instructed. "I've seen bear claw marks. These were different, deeper, more deliberate, and bears don't go around to multiple cabins like that." "What about your lizard man theory?" Benjamin asked me. "The book said the original sightings were in South Carolina, right? Could it have migrated north?" The question highlighted the absurdity of our situation. Here we were, seriously discussing the migration patterns of a cryptid, Yet, after what we'd witnessed, even such far-fetched theories seemed worth consideration. That afternoon, 2 Forest Service rangers arrived at camp. They spent hours examining the marks on the cabins, taking photographs and measurements, collecting samples from the mud tracks. I watched from a distance as they consulted with Pastor Drew, their expressions growing increasingly puzzled. One ranger, a woman with short gray hair and a weathered face, noticed me watching and approached. "You're the one who saw something, right?" she asked without preamble. I nodded, surprised that Pastor Drew had mentioned my experience. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" For the next 20 minutes, she interviewed me thoroughly about what I'd seen, when I'd heard the noises, and the creature's behavior. Unlike others, she didn't dismiss my account or suggest I'd imagined it. "We've had unusual reports from these woods before," she admitted when I finished my story. "Nothing conclusive, but enough to make us take this seriously. Whatever made these marks isn't typical wildlife. The pattern, depth, and spacing are inconsistent with known predators in this region." "Do you think it's dangerous?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "It hasn't directly attacked anyone, which is a good sign, but it's showing increasingly bold behavior by approaching buildings. I've recommended that camp administration consider ending the session early, just as a precaution." Her words sent a jolt of alarm through me. If professional rangers were concerned enough to suggest closing the camp, the situation was more serious than I'd realized. That evening, as we gathered for dinner, Pastor Drew made the announcement. Camp Pinewood would be closing temporarily while authorities investigated the disturbances. Parents had been contacted and would begin arriving the following day to collect their children. The news was met with a mixture of disappointment and relief. Many campers were upset at having their summer experience cut short, while others, especially those who had heard about the claw marks, seemed eager to leave. As we packed our belongings that night, an unusual tension filled Cabin 6. Ricky had instructed us to stay together and keep the windows closed, despite the summer heat. The resulting atmosphere was stifling, both physically and emotionally. "Do you think it will come back tonight?" Graham asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "The Rangers are patrolling," Ricky assured us, "and Pastor Drew has arranged for additional security. We'll be fine." His words were confident, but I noticed he kept glancing at the reinforced window, and a baseball bat now stood propped beside his bed. Sleep came reluctantly that night. Every sound, the wind in the trees, the creaking of the old cabin, the occasional voice of rangers on their radios, jolted me awake. When I did manage to doze off, my dreams were filled with pursuing shadows and glinting red eyes. Around 2 a.m., I awakened to a strange stillness. The usual night sounds had ceased, leaving an unnatural silence that pressed against my ears. Beside me, Wesley was also awake, his eyes wide in the darkness. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I shook my head. I heard nothing, and that was precisely what disturbed me. The forest had gone quiet, as if holding its breath. Then it came, a low, rattling hiss from somewhere outside, followed by heavy footsteps circling the cabin. Not the cautious movement of rangers, but the deliberate pace of something large. Wesley reached over and shook Benjamin awake while I slipped out of bed to alert Ricky. Before I could reach his partitioned area, a powerful impact struck the cabin door, strong enough to make the entire structure shudder. Everyone was awake now, scrambling from their bunks as a second impact hit, splintering the heavy wooden beam that barred the door. "Get back!" Ricky shouted, positioning himself between us and the entrance, baseball bat raised. A third blow broke the beam completely. The door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond, a darkness that seemed to move and breathe. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, a shape filled the doorway, tall, hunched, with that distinctive elongated head. In the dim emergency light, I could make out more details than before. The rough, textured skin that resembled scales. The unnaturally long arms ending in clawed hands. Those reflective eyes, glinting with an intelligence that was decidedly predatory. It made that rattling hiss again, surveying the room as we pressed ourselves against the far wall. Ricky stood his ground, though I could see his hands trembling on the bat. "Get out!" he shouted at the creature, his voice cracking with fear. Whether it understood his words or merely responded to the tone, the creature took a step forward, ducking its head to clear the doorframe. It moved with that same fluid grace I'd observed before, each motion suggesting coiled strength and inhuman flexibility. What happened next occurred with blinding speed. Ricky swung the bat, connecting solidly with the creature's midsection. It recoiled, more from surprise than pain it seemed, and let out a harsh, guttural cry that raised every hair on my body. Before Ricky could swing again, the creature's arm shot out, knocking him aside with casual strength. He hit the wall with a painful thud, the bat clattering from his grasp. Panic erupted. Noah and Graham bolted past the creature through the open door, taking advantage of its momentary distraction. The rest of us remained frozen, trapped between the wall and the advancing intruder. Just as it took another step toward us, bright lights flooded the clearing outside, accompanied by shouting voices. The creature whipped around, hissing loudly at this new threat. Through the doorway, I could see ranger vehicles, their spotlights illuminating the area. Several uniformed figures approached, weapons drawn. The creature hesitated only briefly before retreating through the door, moving with that distinctive loping run. Gunshots rang out, followed by more shouting and the crashing sound of something large moving rapidly through underbrush. Minutes later, rangers rushed into our cabin, checking for injuries and herding us outside to the relative safety of their vehicles. In the confusion, I glimpsed figures pursuing something into the woods, flashlight beams bouncing through the trees before disappearing into the darkness. We spent the remainder of the night in the mess hall, huddled together with campers from other cabins as rangers and local police secured the perimeter. Noah and Graham were found hiding in the bathhouse, shaken but unharmed. Ricky suffered a bruised shoulder, but nothing more serious. By dawn, a decision had been made. Camp Pinewood would close immediately. Parents were being contacted to collect their children as soon as possible. My mother arrived around noon on Monday, her face tight with worry as she emerged from her car. I ran to her, the relief of seeing her overwhelming after the previous night's terror. "Are you all right?" she demanded, holding me at arm's length to check for injuries. They wouldn't tell me exactly what happened, just that there was some kind of incident. "I'm fine," I assured her, though fine hardly described my mental state. "I'll explain in the car." As we loaded my hastily packed belongings into the trunk, I noticed Forest Service vehicles still parked around the camp, rangers conferring in small groups. Yellow police tape cordoned off areas of the forest edge, and men with tracking dogs moved methodically through the underbrush. Whatever they were looking for, they hadn't found it yet. Pastor Drew approached as we prepared to leave, his expression grave. "Jake, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I should have taken your concerns more seriously from the beginning." I nodded, accepting his words without comment. Vindication brought little satisfaction after what we'd experienced. "Do they know what it was?" I asked, gesturing toward the search teams. He hesitated. "They're still investigating. The official statement mentions an aggressive, unidentified wildlife specimen, but..." His voice trailed off, the unspoken implications hanging between us. "Will the camp reopen?" "Not this summer," he admitted. "Beyond that, I don't know." As we drove away, I watched Camp Pinewood recede in the side mirror, the familiar buildings looking somehow smaller, more vulnerable against the backdrop of the vast forest. The pines seemed to close ranks behind us, guarding their secrets. In the car, I told my mother everything, the noises, the sightings, the attack on our cabin. To her credit, she listened without interruption, her knuckles whitening on the steering wheel as my story unfolded. "The Rangers will find it," she said when I finished, though her tone lacked conviction, whatever it was. I didn't argue, but I knew better. The forest was vast, with countless places to hide. If the creature had survived this long without being documented, it could easily disappear again, becoming just another mysterious sighting, another campfire story. As we left the mountains behind, following the highway back toward Raleigh, I checked the news on my phone. Local outlets reported only that Camp Pinewood had closed due to wildlife concerns, with no mention of what we'd seen or the true nature of the incident. By next week, it would be forgotten by all except those of us who had been there. In the weeks that followed, I researched everything I could find about the Carolina lizard man and similar creatures reported throughout the region. Most accounts were dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but a few, those with multiple witnesses or physical evidence, resisted easy explanation. I joined online forums where people shared their encounters with unexplained phenomena, finding a community of individuals who had experienced things beyond conventional understanding. Some of their stories paralleled mine with unsettling similarity: the distinctive hissing sound, the red reflective eyes, the unusual gait. Wesley and Benjamin stayed in touch, our shared experience creating a bond that transcended our previous casual friendship. We compared notes, shared research, and sometimes just talked about that night when our understanding of the world had fundamentally changed. The rangers never announced finding anything unusual in the woods surrounding Camp Pinewood. The official report, which I obtained through a Freedom of Information request months later, attributed the incidents to vandalism and probable bear activity, despite the inconsistencies this explanation presented. Camp Pinewood remained closed the following summer. When I drove past the entrance a year later, the sign had been removed, and weeds choked the driveway. Whatever had happened there, the church had decided not to reopen the facility. Sometimes at night, when I lie awake listening to the familiar sounds of my suburban neighborhood, my mind drifts back to those woods. I wonder if it's still there, watching from the shadows between the pines, waiting for the next unwary camper to venture out after dark. I wonder if anyone would believe them if they saw it. The Carolina lizard man, or whatever name you prefer for the thing that hunted us that summer, remains a mystery, neither proven nor disproven. Official denial doesn't erase what we experienced, what we saw with our own eyes in the harsh light of truth and terror. The forest keeps its secrets well, but sometimes, in the deep of night, those secrets find a way to make themselves known, challenging our comfortable assumptions about the world and what might lurk at its edges. I haven't been camping since that summer. Some risks aren't worth taking twice.